They lined us up like livestock at market. 10 mail-order brides, fresh off the wagon, standing in the dust while men circled like vultures. One by one, they chose, the pretty ones, the young ones, the ones who looked like they wouldn't cause trouble. I watched them go, each one a reminder of what I wasn't. When the last girl got claimed, I stood there alone. That's when the laughter started. Grown men pointing, women whispering behind their hands. I'd traveled 1,000 miles to be someone's wife, and now I was the town joke. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Because what happened next? Nobody saw coming. The wagon had stopped rolling 3 hours ago, but my legs still felt the phantom sway of 2 weeks on bad roads. My back ached. My dress, the only decent one I owned, was wrinkled beyond salvation, dark circles blooming under my arms despite the cold October air. I tried to fix my hair in the wagon's side mirror, but given up after the third attempt. What was the point? They'd see what they'd see. Copper Ridge looked exactly like every other frontier town I'd imagined. A main street of hard-packed dirt, wooden buildings that leaned slightly, as if tired of standing, and mountains rising in the distance like broken teeth. The air smelled of horse manure, wood smoke, and something else I couldn't name. Hope, maybe. Or desperation. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. All right, ladies. Mrs. Pemberton, the woman who'd chaperoned our journey, stood at the front of our ragged line. She was a small woman with a voice that could crack stone. Remember what I told you. Stand straight. Smile. These men are looking for wives, not burdens. You're here to build lives, not complain about them. There were 10 of us. Most were younger, girls really, though they'd probably slap me for saying so. 18, 19, maybe 20 years old. Slim waists, clear skin, bright eyes full of that particular kind of optimism that only comes from not knowing better yet. I was 34. My waist had given up being slim around the time my husband died, and my eyes held the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. Sarah, standing next to me, grabbed my hand. She was 19, blonde, pretty in that fragile way that made men want to protect her. We'd become something like friends on the journey, though I suspected that would end today. "You look fine, Delia," she whispered. "You're a terrible liar," I whispered back, but I squeezed her hand anyway. The men were gathering. I could hear them before I could see them clearly. Boots on wood, rough laughter, the occasional whistle. Mrs. Pemberton had arranged us in front of the general store, like produce on display. The indignity of it settled in my stomach like bad meat, but what choice did I have? I'd sold everything I owned to pay for this trip. There was nothing to go back to. "Jesus Christ, look at them," someone said, and several men laughed. "The blonde one." "I'll take the blonde one." "Mrs." Pemberton clapped her hand sharply. "Gentlemen, we'll do this properly. Each bride will introduce herself. You'll have a chance to speak with them individually, and then decisions will be made. This isn't a cattle auction." But it was. We all knew it was. Sarah went first. She stepped forward, her voice shaking only a little as she said her name and where she was from. A tall man with a clean shirt and nervous eyes claimed her within 30 seconds. She looked back at me once as he led her away, something apologetic in her face. I smiled to show her it was fine. It wasn't, but it would be. One by one, they stepped forward. One by one, the men chose. Pretty Mary with the red hair. Quiet Anna, who barely spoke above a whisper. Even Elizabeth, who had a clubfoot and a sharp tongue, got claimed by an older rancher who said he needed someone to keep his books, and didn't mind a woman with opinions. I was the last one standing. The crowd had grown. Word had spread, apparently, that there was entertainment to be had. Women had come out of shops, children peered around their mothers' skirts, and men who probably had no intention of marrying anyone had shown up just to watch. "Well," Mrs. Pemberton said, her voice tight, "this is unfortunate." Unfortunate. That was one word for it. A man in the crowd, young, drunk, stupid, or some combination of all three, started laughing. "What's the matter? Nobody want the fat one?" The words hit like a fist, but I'd heard worse. I kept my face still. "She ain't just fat," another voice called out. "She's old too. Look at her." Maybe she can cook, someone else said, which got a bigger laugh. Mrs. Pemberton's face had gone red, though whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. That's quite enough. Miss Marrow is a perfectly respectable woman with excellent references. She was widowed, and she's looking for a fresh start. Just like, how much we gotta pay to take her? The drunk man again. You gonna pay us? The laughter that followed felt like being skinned alive. I stood there and took it because there was nothing else to do. Running would make it worse. Crying would make it worse. So I stood there, 34 years old, heavy and tired and utterly alone, while a town full of strangers made me into a joke. That's enough! Mrs. Pemberton's voice cracked like a whip, but the damage was done. She turned to me, her face a mixture of pity and frustration. Miss Marrow, perhaps we should discuss other arrangements. There's a boarding house in town, and I'm sure we can find you work until... Until what? My voice came out rougher than I intended. Until you can ship me back? Until I can find some other town to humiliate myself in? I didn't mean... I know what you meant. The crowd's laughter had faded into uncomfortable murmuring. Women whispered behind their hands. Men looked away or stared with that particular blend of pity and contempt reserved for failures. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to die. I wanted to go back in time and make different choices, better choices, any choices that didn't lead to this moment. That's when I heard the horse. The sound cut through the murmuring crowd, heavy hoofbeats, slow and deliberate. People turned and the whispering changed tone. Someone said, "Jesus," under their breath. A woman grabbed her child and stepped back. I didn't turn around. I was done performing for these people. Clear out! The voice came from behind me, deep and rough as gravel. All of you. Go on. Now, Rowan, someone started to say, but the voice cut him off. I said, clear out. People moved. I heard them shuffling, boots on wood, whispered conversations fading as they put distance between themselves and whoever this Rowan was. Mrs. Pemberton stayed put, but even she had taken a step back. I finally turned around. The man on the horse was big. Not just tall, though he was that too, probably 6.5 feet, but broad in a way that spoke of hard labor and harder living. His face was weathered, scarred along one cheek, with a beard that looked like it had been trimmed with a knife and not much care. His eyes were dark under the brim of a hat that had seen better days. He wore clothes that were clean but worn, and there was a rifle strapped to his saddle. He looked at me for a long moment, his face unreadable. You the last one? He asked. My throat had gone dry. Yes. What's your name? Cordelia Marrow. People call me Delia. He nodded slowly, still looking at me with those dark eyes. The horse shifted beneath him, and he steadied it with one hand, easy and automatic. Can you cook? He asked. Yes. Can you shoot? I blinked. What? A gun. Can you shoot one? I've never tried. Can you handle cold? I suppose that depends on how cold. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Pretty cold. The crowd was still there, watching from a safer distance. I could feel their eyes on my back, waiting to see what fresh humiliation this would bring. Mrs. Pemberton looked like she wanted to intervene but couldn't figure out how. I live up in the mountains, the man, Rowan, said. About 2 hours' ride from here. It's isolated. Winters are hard, the work's harder. I need someone who can pull their weight, not someone who'll break down crying when things get difficult. I don't cry much, I said. Good. He shifted in his saddle. I'm not offering romance. I'm not offering easy. I'm offering a partnership. You work, I work. We survive together. You'll have your own space, your own autonomy. I won't force anything on you that you don't agree to, but I need to know you're strong enough to handle the life. So I'm asking, are you? I should have asked questions. I should have demanded details, references, some assurance that this man wasn't planning to murder me in the woods. But I looked into his face and saw something I hadn't seen in any of the other men who'd passed me by today. He was looking at me like I was a person, not a problem. Yes, I said, I'm strong enough. He nodded once, decisive. Then he swung down from his horse in one fluid motion and walked toward me. Up close, he was even bigger, and I had to tilt my head back to look at him. He smelled like leather and wood smoke and horse. You'll want to say your goodbyes, he said. Get whatever you brought. We leave in 10 minutes. Mrs. Pemberton finally found her voice. Now wait just a minute. Mr. Hale, I appreciate your interest, but there are procedures. Papers to sign, arrangements to— I'll sign whatever you need, he said without looking at her. But we're leaving today. If that's a problem, say so now. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'll get the papers, she finally said, and hurried into the general store. I stood there looking at this massive stranger who'd just claimed me like a lost package. He looked back at me, his expression still unreadable. You're afraid, he said, not a question. Yes. That's smart. You'd be stupid not to be. He paused. But I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to let anyone else hurt you either. That's the deal. Why? The question came out before I could stop it. Why choose me? He was quiet for a moment, and I thought he might not answer. Then he said, Because you're still standing. What? After all that? He gestured vaguely toward where the crowd had been. The laughing, the insults, you're still standing. That's not nothing. My eyes burned, but I blinked the feeling away. Didn't have much choice. There's always a choice. You could have run, could have broken down, could have lashed out. He looked at me steadily. You didn't. That tells me you're tougher than you look, and toughness is what matters where I live. Mrs. Pemberton came back with papers, and I signed them in a daze, barely reading the words. My whole life was changing in the space of minutes, and I couldn't seem to make my brain catch up with reality. Rowan signed his name in rough, blocky letters, and just like that, I belonged to someone again. No, that wasn't right. I caught the thought and corrected it. I wasn't property. He'd said partnership. I had to hold on to that. My belongings amounted to one small trunk. Clothes, a few books, my mother's Bible that I never read but couldn't bring myself to leave behind, and a carved wooden box that held nothing but memories. Rowan lifted the trunk like it weighed nothing and strapped it to his horse. You ever ridden? He asked. Not really. You'll learn. He swung up into the saddle, then reached down. Give me your hand. I hesitated. This was it, the moment of no return. If I took his hand, I'd be leaving behind everything familiar, heading into the mountains with a man I didn't know, trusting that he'd keep his word. I took his hand. His grip was strong, calloused, and he pulled me up behind him with surprising ease. The horse shifted under the extra weight but steadied quickly. Hold on, he said. I wrapped my arms around his waist, feeling the solid bulk of him, the warmth of his body through his jacket. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could feel it. We rode out of Copper Ridge at a walk, and I didn't look back. Couldn't look back. If I did, I might lose what little courage I had left. The town gave way to scrubland, which gave way to pine forest. The road, such as it was, grew rougher, winding upward into the mountains. The air got colder. Rowan didn't speak, and neither did I. The only sounds were the horse's hooves, the creak of the saddle, and the wind in the trees. After about an hour, he said, You can let go a little. I'm not going to let you fall. I realized I'd been gripping him like a drowning person grips a rope. I loosened my hold slightly, my arms aching. Sorry, I said. Don't be sorry. Just find a way to hold on that doesn't cut off my circulation. I adjusted my grip, feeling awkward and oversized and utterly out of place. How much further? Another hour or so. The mountains rose around us, massive and indifferent. I'd never seen anything like them. Back east, the landscape was gentler, more forgiving. This was raw and wild and utterly unforgiving. You really live up here? I asked. For the last 8 years. Alone? Mostly. What do you do? Hunt, trap, sell furs, do some guiding work when the weather's good. He paused. And I mine. Some. Mine what? Silver. There's a seam on my property. Not much, but enough. I tried to picture it, this solitary life in the mountains, digging silver from stone. It seemed impossibly lonely. Don't you get isolated? I asked. That's the point. His tone didn't invite further questions, so I fell silent. The sun was sinking lower when we finally reached a clearing. A cabin stood in the center, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney. It was bigger than I'd expected, but still small, maybe 2 rooms, by the look of it. There was a lean-to off to one side that probably served as a stable, and a small shed that could be for storage. Rowan dismounted and helped me down. My legs were shaky and I stumbled. He caught my elbow, steadying me. "Takes some getting used to," he said. "The riding." "Everything takes some getting used to," I said, looking around. He almost smiled again. "True enough. Come on. I'll show you inside." The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. The main room had a fireplace, a rough table with 2 chairs, a few shelves lined with supplies. There were furs on the floor, and the walls were chinked tight against the cold. A door led to what I assumed was a bedroom. "That's yours," Rowan said, gesturing to the door. "I sleep out here. You'll have privacy." I stared at him. "You're giving me the bedroom?" "I don't need much. A bedroll by the fire suits me fine." He was already moving around the room, building up the fire. "There's a stream about 50 yards that way for water. Outhouse is behind the cabin. We've got stores to last through winter, but fresh game is always better. I hunt most days." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked at me, his dark eyes steady. "Whatever needs doing, cooking, mending, keeping the place livable. Learning to handle yourself if trouble comes. Making this a home instead of just a shelter." "And if I can't?" "Then we'll figure something else out." He straightened up from the fire. "I'm not going to punish you for failing at something, Delia. I'm only going to be disappointed if you don't try." The way he said my name, casual, like we'd known each other for years instead of hours, sent an odd feeling through my chest. "I'll try," I said. "That's all I'm asking." He showed me the bedroom, small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out onto the mountains. My trunk was already there, somehow transported while I wasn't looking. There was a wash basin, a small dresser, even a rug on the floor. "It's not much," he said from the doorway. "It's mine," I said quietly. "Yeah, it is." After he left, I sat on the bed and let myself shake. The whole day crashed over me, the humiliation, the fear, the desperate gamble I'd just made. I could still hear that drunk man's laughter, still feel the weight of the crowd's contempt. But I was here, in a cabin in the mountains with a strange man who'd chosen me, not despite my weaknesses, but because I was strong enough to endure. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. I unpacked slowly, hanging my few dresses on pegs, placing my mother's Bible on the dresser next to the carved box. The simple act of arranging my things helped settle my nerves. When I came out, Rowan had made a simple dinner, venison stew with root vegetables, bread that was probably a few days old but still good. We ate in silence at first, the fire crackling, the wind picking up outside. "You'll need warmer clothes," he said eventually. "What you're wearing won't cut it up here." "I don't have money for—" "I've got furs. I'll make you a coat. Boots too, probably. Your feet are going to freeze in those." He nodded at my worn leather shoes. "You can make clothes? You learn to do a lot of things when you live alone." "Why did you?" I asked. "Live alone, I mean." He was quiet for a long moment, chewing thoughtfully. Then he said, "People are complicated. Mountains aren't." It wasn't really an answer, but I understood it anyway. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You just did." "Can I ask you another something?" He almost smiled. "Go ahead." "What would you have done if I'd said no, back in town?" He considered the question. "Respected your choice, ridden back up here alone." "You wouldn't have been angry?" "Why would I be angry? It's your life. You're allowed to choose what you do with it." The words settled into me like stones into water, sinking deep. My whole life, men had told me what to do, where to go, how to be. My father, my late husband, every employer I'd ever had. The idea that this massive, intimidating man would simply accept my refusal seemed impossible. "You're not what I expected," I said. "Neither are you." "What did you expect?" "Someone younger, prettier, weaker." He looked at me across the table. "Someone who'd break." "I might still break." "Maybe, but you'll have to work harder at it than most." After dinner, I washed the dishes in water he'd heated over the fire. My hands were clumsy with exhaustion, and I nearly dropped a bowl twice. Rowan didn't comment, just banked the fire for the night and checked the door was secured. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow starts early." I nodded and retreated to my room, closing the door. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, the quilts heavy and warm. I could hear Rowan moving around in the main room, settling in for the night. I should have been terrified. I was alone in the wilderness with a man I didn't know, no way to leave, no one to help if things went wrong. But lying there in the dark, listening to the wind in the pines and the distant call of some night bird, I felt something I hadn't expected: safe. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd made the right choice. I fell asleep to the sound of the wind and woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Pale light filtered through the window. I dressed quickly, splashing cold water on my face from the basin, and came out to find Rowan already up, breakfast cooking. "Morning," he said. "Morning." "Coffee's ready. Food in a minute." I poured myself a cup, warming my hands on the tin. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but I was grateful for it. "Sleep all right?" he asked. "Better than I expected." "Good." He plated the bacon and some kind of fried bread. "We've got work to do today. I need to check the traps, and you need to learn your way around the property. Can't have you getting lost if something happens." "What might happen?" "Anything. Weather turns bad, I get hurt, supplies run low. You need to know how to manage without me if it comes to that." The practical nature of it was almost comforting. He wasn't trying to control me, he was trying to prepare me. There was a difference. We spent the morning walking the property. He showed me the boundaries, the places where game trails crossed, the spots to avoid because the ground was unstable. He pointed out edible plants, water sources, landmarks to navigate by. "You've got a good memory?" he asked. "Good enough." "Better be better than good enough. Getting lost up here can kill you." He wasn't being dramatic. I could see it in his face, hear it in his voice. This was simply fact. By midday, my feet were aching and my breath came hard in the thin mountain air. But I kept up. I told him I was strong enough, and I'd be damned if I'd prove myself a liar on the first day. We checked his trap line, a series of carefully concealed traps set along animal paths. Most were empty, but one held a rabbit. Rowan dispatched it quickly, efficiently, without cruelty. "You'll need to learn this too," he said. "Can you handle blood?" I thought of the chickens I'd slaughtered as a girl, my husband's wounds in his final days. "Yes." "Good." He taught me how to clean the rabbit, his big hands surprisingly deft. I watched carefully, trying to memorize each step. "Your turn," he said, producing a second rabbit from his pack. "I got this one earlier." My hands shook a little, but I made the first cut. He guided me through it, patient when I fumbled, matter of fact when I got it right. By the end, I had a cleaned rabbit and blood under my fingernails. "Not bad," he said. Coming from him, it felt like high praise. We cooked the rabbit for dinner that night, along with some wild onions he'd gathered. I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but there was a satisfaction in it, the good kind of tired that comes from useful work. "You did well today," Rowan said as we ate. I barely kept up. "You kept up. That's what matters." He paused. "You're tougher than you think you are." "People have been telling me I'm too much of one thing or not enough of another my whole life," I said. Never quite right, somehow. "People are idiots." It startled a laugh out of me, short and rusty, like I'd forgotten how. He looked almost pleased. "You should do that more," he said. "What? Laugh at your profound observations?" "Just laugh in general." The days began to form a pattern. We woke early, worked hard, ate simply, slept soundly. Rowan taught me to shoot, first with a rifle, then with a pistol. My aim was terrible at first, but I got better. He showed me how to preserve meat, how to read weather signs, how to move quietly through the forest. And slowly, carefully, we talked. Not about anything deep at first, just small things, observations about the day, questions about how things worked, occasional dry humor that caught me off guard. But gradually, the conversations grew longer, more personal. I learned that he'd been a soldier once, though he wouldn't say in which war or for which side. That he'd come to the mountains to escape something he wouldn't name. that he valued silence but didn't mind talking to someone who didn't fill every gap with noise. He learned that I'd been married young to a man twice my age who'd been kind enough but had never seen me as more than a housekeeper who warmed his bed. That I'd nursed him through a long, bitter illness that ate through our savings and my youth. That I'd answered the mail-order bride advertisement not out of romance but simple survival. "You loved him?" Rowan asked one night as we sat by the fire. "I cared for him. That's not quite the same thing." "No, it's not." "Did you ever love anyone?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Once. Long time ago. Didn't end well." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me what I needed to know." "What's that?" "That loving people hurts less if you don't expect them to stay." The words sat heavy in the air between us. I wanted to argue, to say something hopeful and human, but I couldn't, because I understood exactly what he meant. 3 weeks into my new life, the first snow came. I woke to find the world transformed, everything white and hushed and strange. Rowan was already up, stacking extra wood by the fire. "Winter's here," he said. "This is just the start." He wasn't exaggerating. Within days, the snow was knee-deep. Within a week, waist-deep. The cold was brutal, seeping through every crack, turning breath to fog, making my bones ache. But the cabin stayed warm, the food held out, and I learned to navigate the altered landscape. Rowan gave me the fur coat he'd promised, thick and warm, and surprisingly well made. The boots, too, lined with rabbit fur, fitting better than anything I'd ever owned. "You're good at this," I said, running my hand over the coat's careful stitching. "I've had practice. Making women's clothes, making things that last." Snowbound, we spent more time together in the cabin. There was only so much work to do when you couldn't go outside. We read, he had a surprising collection of books, we played cards, we talked. And one night, as the wind howled outside and the fire burned low, he asked, "Do you regret it? Coming here?" I considered the question honestly. Did I miss warmth, comfort, the company of other women? Yes. Did I miss not aching constantly from hard work? Absolutely. But did I regret choosing this life over the alternative? No, I said. I don't. Even after everything? The isolation, the cold, the work? Even after. I looked at him across the fire. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm building something instead of just surviving. "We're just surviving," he said. "No. Surviving is what I did with my husband, going through the motions, waiting for it to end. This is different. This is choosing to endure because what we're building matters." He looked at me then with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You surprise me," he said. "Good. You need surprising. You spend too much time up here with only your thoughts." "My thoughts are safer than most people." "Maybe, but they're probably not as interesting." He laughed, a real laugh, deep and genuine. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. I realized it was the first time I'd heard him truly laugh, and the sound pleased me more than I wanted to admit. As winter deepened, so did our partnership. We moved around each other with increasing ease, anticipating needs, sharing work without discussion. When I cooked, he cleaned. When he hunted, I prepared what he brought back. When the cold got too brutal, we sat close to the fire and read aloud to each other, taking turns with voices and characters. It was a strange kind of intimacy, born not of romance but of mutual survival, mutual respect. We didn't touch beyond the practical. We didn't speak of feelings or futures, but there was something growing between us, solid and sure as the cabin walls. Then, one frozen February morning, everything changed. I was out getting water from the stream. We'd carved a hole in the ice and kept it open. When I heard riders, the sound was distinct, out of place in the winter silence. I looked up to see 3 men on horseback, making their way up the trail toward the cabin. My heart kicked hard in my chest. Rowan had said we wouldn't see anyone until spring. Visitors in winter meant trouble. I grabbed the water bucket and ran, stumbling through snow, my breath sharp in my lungs. I burst into the cabin to find Rowan already at the window, rifle in hand. I heard, he said. Get back, away from the door. Who are they? Don't know yet, but nobody friendly rides up here in winter. The riders stopped in front of the cabin. One dismounted, a tall man in expensive clothes too clean for this country, with a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't so cruel. Rowan Hale, he called out. I know you're in there. Come out and talk like a civilized man. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he opened the door, rifle held loose but ready. Victor Crow. Didn't expect to see you until the thaw. Life's full of surprises. The man, Crow, smiled without warmth. I've come about your squatter situation. I'm not squatting, I've got deed to this land. Funny thing about that, I've been doing some research into land claims in this area. Turns out there's some questions about the legitimacy of your purchase. Might need to be settled in court. There's no questions. The land's mine, bought legal and recorded proper. We'll see what a judge says. Crow's eyes flicked past Rowan to where I stood in the shadows. But that's not why I came today. I heard you went and got yourself a mail-order bride. That true? That's none of your business. See, here's the thing. Crow's smile widened. I heard a different story. Heard you took a woman who was already spoken for. Heard she was promised to another man, and you stole her right out from under him. My blood went cold. That's a lie, Rowan said flatly. Is it? Because I got a signed affidavit here from a Mr. James Pemberton saying his wife arranged for a bride for his cousin and you interfered with a legal contract. That's theft, Hale. That woman isn't yours to keep. Show me the paper, Rowan said. Crow pulled out a document, holding it just out of reach. It's all legal and proper. You're harboring stolen property. I'm here to take her back. The word stolen property hit me like a slap. I'd been called many things, but never that. Never reduced to an object that could be owned and stolen and claimed. I stepped forward into the light. I'm nobody's property. Crow looked at me with barely concealed disdain. Ma'am, you don't understand the situation. You signed a contract. I signed a contract to be a mail-order bride, not to be anyone's slave, not to be property. Mr. Hale signed the same papers I did, all legal and proper, witnessed by Mrs. Pemberton herself. Mrs. Pemberton had no authority to override an existing claim. What existing claim? I demanded. There was no other claim. I was the last woman standing. Nobody wanted me. Mr. Hale chose me fairly. Crow's expression hardened. This isn't a negotiation, ma'am. I've got the law on my side and 3 men behind me. You can come willingly or we can make this difficult. Rowan shifted his grip on the rifle. You're not taking her anywhere. You want to die over a woman, Hale? That's your choice. But she's coming with me one way or another. The tension stretched tight enough to snap. I could see the calculation in Crow's eyes, the barely restrained violence in his men. This wasn't really about me at all. This is about the silver, I said suddenly. Both men looked at me. That's what this is really about, I continued. You found out about the mine, and you want the land. I'm just an excuse. Crow's smile turned sharp. Smart woman. Too smart to die over a worthless claim in the middle of nowhere. Come with me now, and I promise you'll be treated well. Stay here, and you'll die with him when winter runs out your supplies, or when my patience runs out, whichever comes first. I looked at Rowan. His face was hard, ready for violence, but there was something else there too, a question. He was leaving the choice to me. I could go. Walk out that door, avoid bloodshed, maybe even survive whatever Crow had planned. It would be easier. Safer, perhaps. Or I could stay. Fight for the home I'd built, the life I'd chosen, the man who'd seen me as strong when everyone else saw me as weak. I thought of that day in Copper Ridge, standing alone while people laughed. Thought of every time I'd chosen safety over dignity, survival over selfhood. I was done making that choice. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm not going anywhere. Crow's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. It's mine to make. He looked at Rowan. You're both fools. I'll give you until spring to reconsider. After that, I'm coming back with more men and legal papers that'll bury you. Think about that while you freeze to death up here. He remounted his horse, and the 3 of them rode off, disappearing into the white landscape. Rowan closed the door and set the rifle down. His hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline probably, or anger, or both. You should have gone, he said quietly. Why? Because he's right. He'll come back in spring with enough men to take whatever he wants. You could have what? Saved myself by letting him use me as leverage against you? Abandoned everything I've built here because some rich man decided he wants your land? I shook my head. I'm not doing that. I'm not running anymore. He looked at me for a long moment, something intense and complicated in his eyes. You understand what you've just committed to? This isn't going to end peacefully. I know. People might die. I know. You might die. I know. I moved closer to him. But I'd rather die fighting for something I chose than live as someone's property. You taught me that. I didn't teach you that. Yes, you did. Every day, treating me like a partner instead of a burden, trusting me to be strong enough. That taught me. I paused. I'm not leaving. Not for Crow, not for anyone. This is my home now, and I'll defend it. He reached out then, hesitant, and touched my shoulder, the first time he'd initiated contact that wasn't purely practical. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. For what? For choosing to stay, for being brave enough to fight. I'm terrified, I admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He stepped back, his hand falling away. But we're in this together now. Whatever comes, we face it as partners. Partners? I agreed. Outside, the wind picked up, and fresh snow began to fall. Spring was still months away. Crow would return with his threats and his men. The battle was coming. But standing in that cabin, warm and solid and chosen, I felt something I'd never felt before. Ready. The snow didn't stop for 3 days. Came down heavy and relentless, erasing the tracks Crow and his men had left, burying the world under layers of white silence. Rowan spent most of that time preparing, cleaning weapons, checking ammunition, reinforcing the cabin's weak points with extra timber he'd stored in the lean-to. I watched him work, saw the methodical way he approached each task, and realized this wasn't new to him. He'd done this before, prepared for violence, calculated odds, made himself ready for whatever came next. You were a soldier, I said on the third day, not quite a question. He paused in his work, a box of cartridges in his hands. Yeah. Which side? Does it matter? I suppose not. I was mending a tear in one of his shirts, my fingers stiff from the cold despite the fire. How long? 4 years felt like 40. He set the ammunition down and came to sit across from me. I was young, stupid, thought war was about glory and righteousness. What was it about? Death? Mostly just death? He looked into the fire. I killed men I didn't hate for reasons I didn't understand. Watched friends die in ways that still wake me up some nights. By the end, I couldn't remember why any of it had mattered. I kept sewing, giving him space to talk or not talk, whichever he needed. That's why I came here, he continued. Figured if I was going to survive, I needed to be somewhere people weren't, somewhere quiet enough that I could hear myself think again. Did it work? For a while. He looked at me. Then you showed up and complicated everything. Sorry. Don't be. Some complications are worth it. The words hung between us, heavier than they should have been. I tied off my thread and bit it clean, not trusting myself to respond. I need to teach you more, he said abruptly. About fighting, defending yourself. If Crow comes back with the numbers he's threatening, I can't protect you. And hold them off at the same time. I'm not much of a fighter. You don't have to be much of one. You just have to be enough. He stood and retrieved 2 knives from his pack. One his, one smaller. Come here. He spent the next hour teaching me the basics, how to hold a blade, where to strike, what to do if someone grabbed me. His instruction was patient but blunt, demonstrating holds and breaks with a clinical detachment that somehow made it easier to learn. Most men won't expect you to fight back, he said. Use that. They'll underestimate you because you're a woman, because you're heavy, because they think you're weak. That's your advantage. I am weak, compared to most men. Strength isn't just muscle, it's will. It's being willing to do what needs doing when it needs doing. He adjusted my grip on the knife. You've got that. I've seen it. How can you be sure? Because you're still here. You chose to stay even knowing what's coming. That's not weakness, Delia. That's the opposite. We drilled until my arms ached and my hands were blistered. He didn't let me quit, didn't accept excuses, but he also didn't push beyond what I could handle. It was the same way he'd taught me everything else. Firm but fair, demanding but not cruel. When we finally stopped, I was sweating despite the cold, my breath coming hard. Good, he said. Tomorrow we'll work on shooting while moving. Can't always stand still in a fight. Tomorrow, I might not be able to move at all. You'll move. Pain's just information. It tells you you're alive. That's a bleak philosophy. It's kept me breathing for 43 years. I looked at him, really looked at him. The scars on his hands and face, the way he carried himself like a man expecting attack, the careful control he maintained over everything around him. He'd survived so much, endured so much, and somehow still had enough humanity left to be kind to a stranger who'd stumbled into his life. What? He asked, catching me staring. Nothing, just thinking. About? How strange life is. 6 months ago, I was washing sheets in a boarding house in Philadelphia, saving pennies for a train ticket west. Now I'm in the mountains learning knife fighting from a man I barely know, preparing for a battle that might kill us both. You regret it yet? No, that's the strange part. I flexed my sore fingers. I should. Any sane person would. But I don't. Maybe you're not sane. Maybe neither of us is. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. Probably true. The days blurred together after that. We fell into a new rhythm, training in the mornings, working in the afternoons, planning in the evenings. Rowan drew maps in the dirt by the fire, showing me the terrain around the cabin, marking places we could fall back to if we had to abandon the main building, pointing out natural choke points where a few defenders could hold off larger numbers. You really think it'll come to that? I asked one night, studying his rough diagrams. I think Crow wants this land bad enough to kill for it, and men like him don't make empty threats. He added another mark to his map. The silver vein runs deeper than he knows. If he ever saw the full extent of it, he'd bring an army. How much is there? Enough to change a life, maybe several lives. He sat back. That's why I kept it quiet. The moment people know you've got something valuable, you stop owning it and start defending it. Is that what I am? Something valuable you have to defend? He looked at me, his expression serious. You're not property, Delia. You're a person who chose to build a life here. That makes you a partner, not a possession. There's a difference. Crow doesn't see it that way. A crow sees everything as something to own or destroy. It's how men like him think. He paused. But he's wrong about you. You're not anyone's to claim. The conviction in his voice settled something in my chest that had been uncertain since the day Crow rode up. Rowan might be hard, might be damaged, might be more comfortable with silence than conversation, but he meant what he said. He saw me as an equal, and in this hard country, that mattered more than romance or sweet words ever could. February dragged into March, and the snow finally began to ease. The sun stayed longer each day, though the nights were still brutal. Rowan started ranging farther from the cabin, checking trails, looking for signs of activity. He came back one afternoon with news that tightened his jaw. Tracks, he said. 2 riders, maybe 3 days old. They came up to about a mile from here, then turned back. Crow's men? Most likely. Checking to see if we're still here, probably reporting back on conditions. He hung up his coat. Won't be long now. Once the main trail's clear enough for horses, he'll come. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. I felt my stomach drop, but kept my voice steady. What do we need to do? Everything we've been doing, but faster. He moved to the window, looking out at the thinning snow. I want you to practice every day now. Shooting, fighting, moving through rough terrain. You need to be able to handle yourself without thinking about it. I'm not a soldier, Rowan. No, but you're going to have to fight like one anyway. The training intensified. He pushed me harder, demanded more. accepted nothing but my best effort. Some days I wanted to quit, wanted to tell him I couldn't do it, that I wasn't strong enough or brave enough or skilled enough. But every time the words formed, I remembered that day in Copper Ridge, the laughter, the humiliation, the feeling of being utterly worthless. I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees again. So I practiced until my hands bled and my muscles screamed. I learned to load a rifle in the dark, to move quietly through underbrush, to read terrain for defensive positions. Rowan drilled me relentlessly, and when I finally managed something correctly, his approval was brief but genuine. "Better," he'd say, and somehow that single word meant more than any flowery praise. We also prepared the cabin itself. Rowan reinforced the door with iron brackets, cut firing positions in the walls that could be quickly opened or closed, stacked supplies in strategic locations. He showed me the escape route he'd carved through the back wall, hidden behind a false panel leading into the root cellar, and from there to a tunnel he'd dug years ago that emerged 50 yards into the tree line. "Paranoid," I said when he showed me. "Prepared," he corrected. Paranoid would be assuming everyone's out to get you. I just assumed that someone might be, and I'd rather have options. Has anyone ever told you that you think too much? Constantly, usually right before they get themselves killed by not thinking enough. We were in the root cellar, checking supplies by lantern light. The space was cramped, forcing us close together. I could smell wood smoke and leather on him, familiar scents that had become associated with safety in my mind. "Rowan," I said quietly. "Yeah?" "If this goes badly, if Crow wins, I want you to know something." "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't talk like we've already lost. We haven't fought yet." "I know, but just in case—" "No." He turned to face me, his expression fierce. "We're going to survive this, both of us. I didn't choose you just to watch you die." The intensity in his voice caught me off guard. "You can't promise that. Watch me." He gripped my shoulders, his hands heavy and warm. "I've survived worse than Victor Crow. I've walked through hell and come out the other side. I'll do it again if I have to, and I'll drag you through with me. Understand?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Say it." "I understand." "Good." He released me and went back to checking supplies, as if the moment hadn't happened, as if he hadn't just promised to fight death itself to keep me alive. But my shoulders still felt warm where his hands had been. Spring arrived in earnest in mid-March. The snow melted fast, turning the trails to mud, swelling the stream to twice its normal size. Wildflowers pushed through the last patches of snow, absurdly bright against the brown earth. It should have been beautiful, this return of life to the frozen world. Instead, it felt like a countdown. Rowan grew quieter as the days passed, his attention constantly on the trails, the tree line, any sign of approaching riders. He slept less, ate less, moved through the cabin like a caged animal, waiting for the cage door to open. "You need to rest," I told him one night, finding him at the window again, rifle in hand. "I'll rest when this is over." "You'll be useless if you collapse from exhaustion before they even get here." "I'm fine." "You're not." I moved closer, keeping my voice gentle. "You're running yourself into the ground. It's not helping." "You don't understand." "I understand that you're afraid." The words came out before I could stop them. "You're afraid of losing, of failing to protect what you've built here, of watching me die because you weren't strong enough or fast enough or good enough." He was silent, his jaw tight. "I'm afraid too," I continued. "I'm terrified. But wearing yourself out before the fight even starts isn't going to save either of us. You taught me that fear is just information, so use it. Don't let it use you." He let out a long breath, and some of the tension left his shoulders. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention." He almost smiled. "Go to bed, Delia." "Only if you do the same." "I'll keep watch a bit longer." "Then I'll keep watch with you." So we stood together at the window, watching the moonlight on the mountains, waiting for whatever came next. They came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the last snow. I was outside hanging laundry, sheets and shirts, flapping in the spring breeze, when I heard Rowan's whistle from the cabin. 2 short, 1 long, danger coming. I dropped the laundry basket and ran, my heart already hammering. He met me at the door, rifle in hand, his face grim. "How many?" I asked. "8, maybe 9. Hard to tell with the tree cover. More than we'd hoped for, fewer than we'd feared." "Are you sure it's them?" "Crow's in front. I recognize the horse." I grabbed my own rifle from where we'd stashed it by the door, checking the load with shaking hands. All the training, all the preparation, it was about to be tested. "Remember what we practiced?" Rowan said. "Stay calm, pick your shots, don't waste ammunition." "What if I can't do this?" He looked at me, his dark eyes steady. "You can. I've seen you survive worse than this. I've never been in a gunfight." "Neither had I, the first time. You learn fast or you die. You're good at learning." He moved to the window. "Take the east side. I'll cover west and front. If they breach the door, fall back to the cellar. Don't try to be a hero." "Same to you." He almost smiled. "Deal." The riders appeared at the edge of the clearing, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Crow sat his horse in the center, looking exactly as I remembered. Expensive clothes, cruel face, the bearing of a man who'd never been told no. "Hail!" he called out. "I'm back, like I promised, and I brought friends." Rowan opened the door a crack, rifle visible. "I can see that. Nice of you to announce yourselves. Wanted to give you one last chance to be reasonable." Crow gestured broadly. "Sign over the land, hand over the woman, and you can walk away with your life. That's more generous than you deserve." "I disagree. You're outnumbered 8-1. Math was never my strong suit." One of Crow's men laughed, nervous, uncertain. They'd been told this would be easy, probably. A single man and a woman. Isolated and outgunned. They hadn't expected resistance. "Last chance, Hale," Crow said, his voice hardening. "Don't die for pride." "Not planning on dying at all." Rowan raised his voice slightly. "But I'll give you boys the same chance you're giving me. Ride away now, and nobody has to bleed today." "You think you can take all of us?" "I know I can take enough of you that the rest will reconsider their career choices." Rowan's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Question is, which of you wants to be first? Who's willing to die so Crow can steal some land?" The men shifted in their saddles. I could see the calculation happening. How much were they being paid? Was it worth dying for? "Cowards!" Crow snapped at his men. "He's bluffing. One man can't—" Rowan's shot cut him off. The bullet kicked up dirt 2 feet in front of Crow's horse, making the animal rear. Crow fought for control, his face flushing with rage. "Next one goes through your skull," Rowan said calmly. "Your move." For a long moment, nobody moved. The mountains held their breath. Then Crow smiled, cold and vicious. "Burn it," he said. "Burn them out." 2 men dismounted, pulling torches from their saddlebags. My stomach clenched. We'd prepared for a siege, for a straight fight, but fire. Fire would force us out into the open where they could pick us off easily. "Rowan," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice, "I see it." He fired again, and one of the men with torches dropped, screaming, clutching his leg. "They light those! We're in trouble!" The other man with a torch hesitated, looking at his wounded companion, then at Crow. "Do it!" Crow shouted, "or I'll shoot you myself!" The man lit the torch with shaking hands. "Time to move," Rowan said. He grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back of the cabin. "Cellar, now!" "But now!" We ran. Behind us, I heard glass breaking, the whoosh of flames catching. Smoke began filling the cabin as Rowan shoved aside the false panel and we dropped into the root cellar. The escape tunnel was barely wide enough to crawl through, earth pressing close on all sides. The smell of damp and rot thick in my throat. We crawled. My rifle caught on roots. My dress tore on rocks, and smoke began seeping down from above. I could hear men shouting, the crackle of flames growing louder. The cabin was burning. Our home was burning, everything we'd built turning to ash. We emerged into the trees 50 yards from the cabin, both of us coughing, covered in dirt. Through the smoke, I could see flames engulfing the roof, orange and hungry and merciless. "Bastards," Rowan said, his voice raw with more than smoke. Men were circling the burning building, watching for us to emerge. They hadn't found the tunnel yet, too focused on the main structure, too confident we were trapped inside. "What do we do?" I whispered. Rowan's face was hard, all the careful control gone, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. We make them regret it. He moved through the trees like a ghost, and I followed as quietly as I could. We circled around, getting behind the men watching the cabin. They were spread out, attention on the fire, not expecting attack from the rear. Rowan gestured. He'd take the two on the left. I should target the one on the right. My hands were shaking, but I raised my rifle, sighting down the barrel at a man I didn't know, who probably had a family, who was just doing a job. A man who was burning my home. I pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard into my shoulder. The man dropped, and I didn't let myself think about whether he was dead or wounded. Rowan's shots came a second later, precise and deadly. 2 men down. The others scattered, shouting, confused. Where were the shots coming from? They'd expected us to be trapped, helpless. Instead, we were hunting them. "Split up!" Crow was yelling. "Find them! They can't have gone far!" Rowan grabbed my hand and we ran, deeper into the trees, using the terrain he'd shown me in training. Behind us, men crashed through the underbrush, cursing, firing wildly at shadows. We reached a rocky outcrop Rowan had marked as a defensive position. It offered cover and clear sightlines while being difficult to approach unseen. "Stay low," he said. "Conserve ammunition. Make every shot count." 3 men appeared below us, moving cautiously through the trees. Rowan's rifle spoke once, twice, and 2 of them fell. The third dove behind a tree, returning fire. Bullets chipped rock near my head, and I pressed myself flat, my heart trying to beat out of my chest. "Delia," Rowan said calmly. "East side. Moving target." I looked where he indicated and saw a man trying to flank us through the brush. I aimed, led him slightly like Rowan had taught me, and fired. The man stumbled and went down. "Good shot," Rowan said, and somehow his approval steadied me. The fight became fragmented after that. Moments of intense violence punctuated by long periods of waiting, watching, listening. We moved 3 times, always staying ahead of them, using the terrain to our advantage. Rowan was right. We couldn't outgun them, but we could outlast them, wear them down, make them afraid. By midday, Crow's force was down to 4 men, including himself. The others were dead, wounded, or had fled. The cabin was ash and embers. Everything we'd built was gone, but we were still alive. "Hail!" Crow's voice echoed through the trees. "This is pointless. You can't win. Even if you kill us all, I'll just come back with more men." Rowan didn't answer, just kept scanning the trees, patient and deadly. "I'll make you a deal," Crow continued. "Give me the woman, tell me where the main silver vein is, and I'll let you live. You can walk away from this." I looked at Rowan. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white on his rifle. "Your call," he said quietly. "My call." "He's asking for you. You get to decide what answer he gets." I thought about it, really thought about it. I could end this, could walk out there, surrender, maybe save Rowan's life. It would be the practical choice, the safe choice, the choice that made sense. It would also destroy everything I'd become. "No," I said. "We finished this." Rowan nodded, something like pride flickering across his face. "Together, then." "Together!" We moved again, circling to where Crow's voice had come from. The remaining men were clustered together now, realizing too late that splitting up had been a mistake. They'd come here expecting an easy fight, and instead they'd found a war they weren't prepared to wage. Rowan's hand touched my shoulder and he pointed. I saw them, 4 men, nervous and tired, weapons ready, but eyes darting, looking for threats they couldn't see. "On my signal," Rowan whispered. "Take the one on the left. I'll get Crow." I settled my rifle against my shoulder, sighted carefully, controlled my breathing the way he'd taught me. The man on the left was young, younger than I'd expected. Maybe 20. He looked scared. I pushed the thought away. Scared or not, he'd helped burn my home. He'd come here to kill or drive us away. He'd made his choice. Now I was making mine. Rowan's shot broke the silence, and I fired a heartbeat later. Both men dropped. The other 2 scattered, but Rowan was already moving, closing the distance, using their panic against them. I heard shots, shouting, then silence. When I reached them, one man was dead, Rowan standing over him. The other was wounded, crawling away, leaving a blood trail on the new spring grass. And Crow was gone. "Damn it," Rowan said, already scanning the trees. He ran, probably heading back to his horse. We found him 10 minutes later, stumbling through the forest, out of breath and bleeding from a wound in his side. He turned when he heard us coming, drawing a pistol with shaking hands. "Stay back," he said. "I'll shoot." "Then shoot," Rowan said, still walking forward. Crow pulled the trigger. The gun clicked, empty. He'd forgotten to reload, or maybe he'd already spent all his ammunition. His face went white as Rowan kept coming. "Wait," Crow said. "Wait. We can make a deal. I've got money, influence. I can—" Rowan's fist caught him in the jaw, and Crow went down hard. "You burned my home," Rowan said, his voice quiet and deadly. "You threatened my partner. You brought men here to kill us over land that was never yours." He crouched next to Crow, who was bleeding onto the forest floor. "Give me one good reason I shouldn't put a bullet in you right now." Crow's eyes were wide, desperate. He looked at me. "Please. I was just doing business, just trying to—" "I'm not property," I said coldly, "and this land isn't yours to take. You made your choice when you came here. Now live with it." I raised my rifle, aiming at his head. My hands were steady. My conscience was quiet. This man had tried to destroy everything I'd built, had reduced me to a bargaining chip, had burned my home to the ground. But Rowan put his hand on my barrel, gently pushing it down. "Not like this," he said. "We're not killers. Not in cold blood. He would have killed us. I know, but we're better than him." Rowan looked at Crow with cold contempt. "You're going to leave. You're going to forget this land exists, forget we exist. If I ever see you or your men anywhere near here again, I won't be so merciful. Understand?" Crow nodded frantically. "Get out of my sight." Crow scrambled to his feet and ran, disappearing into the trees, leaving a trail of blood and broken pride behind him. I lowered my rifle, suddenly exhausted. He'll come back. Maybe, but not soon, and not without thinking twice. Rowan looked at me. "You all right?" "I don't know." I looked at my hands, steady during the fight, now starting to shake. "I killed people today." "Yeah, you did." "I should feel worse about it." "Should you?" He took my rifle gently, safing it. "They came here to kill you, to burn you out, take everything you'd built. You defended yourself. That's not murder, Delia. That's survival." "Is there a difference?" "There's all the difference in the world." He touched my face, his rough hand surprisingly gentle. "You're not a killer. You're a survivor. Remember that." We walked back to where the cabin had stood. It was ruins now. Charred logs, collapsed roof, smoke still rising from the embers. Everything we'd built, everything we'd worked for, reduced to ash. I should have cried. Should have broken down. Should have raged at the unfairness of it all. Instead, I felt strangely calm. "We'll rebuild," I said. Rowan looked at me. "What?" "We'll rebuild. The cabin, the life, all of it. We did it once. We can do it again." "Delia, everything's gone." "Not everything." I looked at him. "We're still here. We're still alive. We fought and we won. The land's still ours. The silver's still here. The cabin was just wood and stone. We can make more." He stared at me for a long moment, and then, impossibly, he laughed. A real laugh, deep and genuine and disbelieving. "What?" I asked. "You're insane. You know that?" "Probably, but I'm right." "Yeah." He pulled me close, his arms solid and warm around me. "You're right." We stood there in the ruins of our home, covered in dirt and blood and smoke, holding each other while the mountains watched and the spring sun climbed higher in the sky. We'd survived. We'd fought. We'd won. And tomorrow, we'd start rebuilding. We spent that first night in the lean-to, huddled under what blankets we'd managed to salvage from the edges of the fire. The structure had survived mostly intact, far enough from the main cabin that the flames hadn't reached it, though the heat had warped some of the boards. It smelled like smoke and horse and damp earth, But it had a roof and walls, which was more than the cabin offered now. Rowan sat with his back against the wall, rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. I'd seen that look before, the 1,000-yard stare, people called it. The look of someone replaying violence in their head, counting costs, calculating what came next. "You should sleep," I said. "Can't." "You need to." I said I can't. His voice was rougher than usual, frayed at the edges. Every time I close my eyes, I see it burning. Everything I built, everything I worked for, gone in an hour. I moved closer, sitting next to him in the cramped space. It was just a building. It was 8 years of my life. "No, your life is sitting right here. The building was just where you kept your things." I touched his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. Things can be replaced. Lives can't. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I almost got you killed today. You saved my life today. I brought you into this mess. If you'd gone with any of those other men back in Copper Ridge, I'd be miserable. Probably still getting mocked. Still feeling worthless. Still just surviving instead of living." I gripped his arm harder. "You gave me a choice, Rowan. That's more than anyone else ever did. I chose to stay. I chose to fight. That's on me, not you. You could have died. But I didn't. Neither of us did. We won." He finally looked at me, his dark eyes reflecting the dim moonlight filtering through the gaps in the walls. "You killed a man today. Maybe more than one. That changes you. I know. Does it bother you?" I thought about it honestly. Did it bother me? I'd taken lives today, ended futures, made widows or orphans of people I'd never meet. By all rights, I should be haunted, broken, consumed with guilt. But I wasn't. "No," I said quietly. "It doesn't. Should it?" Most people would say yes. "What do you say?" He was quiet then. "I say you did what you had to do to survive. Nothing shameful in that. Even if I don't feel guilty?" "Especially then. Guilt's just your conscience telling you something. If yours is quiet, maybe that means you made the right choice." He shifted, wincing slightly. "You're bleeding." I looked down and saw that he was right. My sleeve was torn and blood-soaked where a bullet had grazed my arm during the fight. I'd been too focused on surviving to notice, but now that he'd pointed it out, it started to throb. "Let me see," Rowan said, already moving. "It's fine. It's not fine. Infection up here can kill you faster than a bullet." He found a relatively clean cloth and a canteen of water. "This is going to hurt." It did hurt. The water stung like fire and I bit my lip to keep from crying out. Rowan worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before, cleaning the wound, wrapping it tight with strips torn from a spare shirt. "You've done this before, I said through gritted teeth. "Too many times." He tied off the bandage. "War teaches you a lot of useless skills. Turns out some of them aren't so useless after all." "Where were you hit?" He gave me a sharp look. "What makes you think you're moving stiff on your left side, and you keep touching your ribs when you think I'm not looking? Where?" He sighed and pulled up his shirt. There was a dark bruise spreading across his ribs, angry purple and black. Bullet hit my rifle strap, deflected into the woodstock. The impact cracked a rib, probably. Could be worse. Could be better. I found more cloth and wrapped his ribs as carefully as he'd wrapped my arm. His skin was warm under my hands, scarred in places, old wounds from old wars. "You're a mess. So are you. We make a good pair then." He almost smiled. "I suppose we do." We sat there in the dark, listening to the night sounds. Wind in the pines, an owl calling, the distant howl of something that might have been a wolf. Two people who'd started the day with a home and ended it with nothing but each other and determination. "Tomorrow we start rebuilding," I said. "Tomorrow we figure out what the hell we're doing," he corrected. "Rebuilding takes planning. Can't just throw up walls and hope for the best." "Fine. Tomorrow we plan. Then we rebuild." "You're stubborn." "You say that like it's news." This time he did smile, and we settled into silence, not uncomfortable, just the quiet of two people too tired to fill every moment with words. I must have dozed off because I woke to daylight and the smell of coffee. Rowan was already up, somehow having coaxed a fire to life outside the lean-to, a battered pot balanced on rocks over the flames. "Morning," he said, handing me a tin cup. The coffee was terrible, burned and bitter and probably made from grounds that had been used twice already. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. "How long was I out?" I asked. "Few hours, sun's been up maybe 30 minutes. He was studying the ruins of the cabin, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking. Dangerous occupation. Shut up and listen." But there was no heat in it. "We can't rebuild in the same spot, too exposed. Crow might have run, but he knows where we are now. He comes back or sends someone else. We need better defensibility. Where do you want to build?" He pointed to a rocky outcrop about 100 yards upslope. "There, natural stone on 3 sides, clear sightlines, only one approach that's not a sheer climb. We build into the rock face, use what nature gives us." I studied the location. It would be harder work, more challenging terrain, but he was right. It would be defensible in ways the old cabin never was. "How long, I asked. "To build? Months, maybe through summer if we're lucky. Longer if we're not." "And where do we live while we're building?" "Here, the lean-to. It's not comfortable, but it's shelter." He paused. "Unless you want to go back to town, I'd understand if—" "Stop offering me exits I'm not going to take." I drained my coffee. "We're rebuilding, both of us. Together. I'm not changing my mind just because things got hard." "They're going to get harder." "Good. I was getting bored with easy." He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're insane." "You've mentioned that before. Are we going to stand here discussing my mental state, or are we going to start working?" We started working. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of physical labor that made everything before feel like a vacation. We hauled timber up the slope, dragged stones, dug foundations into stubborn earth and harder rock. My hands blistered, healed, and blistered again. My back ached constantly. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose and gained muscle in places I didn't know muscle could grow. Rowan worked like a man possessed, driving himself past exhaustion day after day. I matched him because pride wouldn't let me do otherwise, and because stopping meant thinking about what we'd lost, what we'd done, what might still be coming. We didn't talk much during those weeks. We were too tired for conversation, too focused on the work. But we developed a rhythm, passing tools without asking, knowing what the other needed before they said it, moving around each other with the ease of people who'd been partners far longer than we actually had been. 3 weeks into the rebuild, a rider appeared on the trail. I saw him first, young, maybe 17, on a tired-looking horse, moving slow and careful like he was expecting trouble. I whistled the danger signal, and Rowan was beside me in seconds, rifle ready. "Easy," the rider called out, hands visible and empty. "I'm not armed, not looking for trouble." "Then you're lost," Rowan said. "Nobody comes up here by accident?" "I'm looking for Delia Marrow. I was told she might be here." My stomach clenched. "Who's asking?" The rider pulled out a letter. "Got a message for you. From Sarah." "Sarah Pemberton?" "Sarah." The blonde girl from the mail-order bride line, the one who'd been picked first, whose apologetic look I still remembered. I took the letter carefully, breaking the seal with dirty, calloused fingers. The handwriting was neat, feminine, worried. "Delia," it read. "I heard what happened with Victor Crow. Everyone in town heard. There's talk that he's been in contact with the territorial marshal, claiming you and Rowan murdered his men. He's spinning a story that makes him the victim, and you two, the criminals. I don't know if the marshal believes him, but Crow has money and influence. I wanted to warn you. My husband says men like Crow don't stop until they get what they want or they're dead. Please be careful. If you need anything, help, supplies, a place to stay, send word. Not everyone in Copper Ridge thinks you're monsters. Some of us remember how they treated you, and some of us think maybe you had the right idea fighting back. Be safe. Sarah." I handed the letter to Rowan, watching his face darken as he read. "The marshal," he said quietly. "That's bad." "How bad?" "Could be nothing. Could be everything." He looked at the messenger. "You got a name?" "Tommy. I work at the stable in town. Sarah's husband paid me to bring the letter up here. The boy looked nervous, like he was expecting to be shot just for delivering bad news. Tell her thank you, I said, and tell her we're fine. You sure about that, ma'am? Because word is, Crow's bringing the marshal up here within the week. Says he's got proof you murdered his men in cold blood, that you're squatting on land that rightfully belongs to him. That's a lie, I said flatly. Maybe so, but the marshal has to investigate anyway. That's his job. Tommy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Sarah wanted you to know so you could, I don't know, prepare maybe, or run. We're not running, Rowan said. Didn't figure you would. But I had to deliver the message. The boy started to turn his horse, then stopped. For what it's worth, most of us regular folks in town don't believe Crow's story. A man like him doesn't need 8 men to reclaim a woman from one mountain man. We know something else happened. Just be careful. Money talks, and Crow's got plenty of it. After he left, Rowan and I stood in silence, watching the dust settle on the trail. The marshal, I said. What happens if he believes Crow? He arrests us. We stand trial. Crow's lawyers make us out to be murderers, and we probably hang. Rowan's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. Or we resist arrest and they shoot us here. Those are terrible options. Welcome to frontier justice. I looked at our half-built cabin, at the new life we were constructing stone by stone, timber by timber. The thought of losing it, of being dragged away in chains, of watching everything burn again, made something cold and hard settle in my chest. We could run, Rowan said quietly. Head into the deep mountains, live wild until this blows over. For how long? Months? Years? Always looking over our shoulders? I shook my head. That's not living. That's just a slower kind of dying. What's the alternative? We stay. We tell the truth. We trust that the marshal is a fair man who'll see through Crow's lies. That's a lot of trust to put in a stranger. You have a better idea? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, no, I don't. The marshal arrived 4 days later with 2 deputies and Victor Crow riding smug and satisfied behind them. We saw them coming from a mile away, a small group on horseback, moving deliberate and official up the mountain trail. Rowan and I met them in front of our half-built cabin, unarmed but not backing down. The marshal was older than I'd expected, maybe 60, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. His badge caught the sunlight, dull and worn but unmistakable. Mr. Hale? Miss Marrow? His voice was gravelly, tired. I'm Marshal Hewitt. I'd like to ask you some questions about an incident that occurred on this property approximately 5 weeks ago. We'll answer your questions, Rowan said, but we're not going anywhere. That depends on your answers. Hewitt dismounted, his deputies following suit. Crow stayed on his horse, his face still showing bruises from where Rowan had hit him. Mr. Crow here claims you murdered 8 of his men in cold blood when they came to serve a legal eviction notice. That's a damn lie, I said. Hewitt held up a hand. I'll hear both sides before I make any determinations. Mr. Crow, you've already given your statement. Now I'd like to hear from Mr. Hale and Miss Marrow, separately, if you don't mind. I mind, Rowan said. Whatever you ask me, you can ask in front of Delia. We've got nothing to hide. Hewitt studied us both for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough? Tell me what happened. From the beginning. So we did. We told him about the mail-order bride arrangement, about Crow's first visit with his fabricated claims, about the 3-week wait. We told him about the attack, the fire, the fight that followed. We didn't lie, didn't embellish, didn't try to paint ourselves as heroes. We just told the truth, ugly and complicated and violent as it was. Hewitt listened without interrupting, his weathered face giving nothing away. When we finished, he was quiet for a long moment. That's quite a story, he said finally. It's the truth, I said. Truth and story aren't always mutually exclusive. He walked over to the ruins of the old cabin, examining the charred remains. Mr. Crow claims he came here to serve legal papers. You say he came to burn you out. Those are very different motivations. Look at the evidence, Marshal, Rowan said. Does it look like we burned our own home? Does it make sense that 8 men came up here just to serve papers? Not particularly, no. Hewitt kicked at a piece of charred timber. But it also doesn't explain why 8 men ended up dead or wounded. That's a lot of bodies for self-defense. How many would be acceptable? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. How many men should we have let kill us before fighting back became justified? Bonjour. Hewitt looked at me, something shifting in his eyes. You got a point there, Miss Marrow. He turned to Crow. You said you came to serve eviction papers. I'd like to see them. Crow's confident expression flickered. They were destroyed in the fire. Convenient. What about copies? Surely you'd have copies of legal documents this important. My lawyer has copies, back in town. Which lawyer? Henry Blackwood, out of Denver. Hewitt pulled out a small notebook, making notes. I'll need to verify that. You said you had proof of a prior claim to Miss Marrow, a contract that superseded Mr. Hale's arrangement. Where's that proof? Also destroyed in the fire. Also convenient. Hewitt's voice was dry. Mr. Crow, I've been a marshal for 23 years. I've heard a lot of stories in that time. You know what I've learned? The truth might be complicated, but it's usually consistent. Lies, on the other hand, tend to have convenient gaps where evidence should be. Crow's face reddened. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying your story has more holes than a mining sieve. Hewitt gestured to the ruins. You came here with 8 armed men to serve legal papers. Papers you claim existed but can't produce. When Mr. Hale and Miss Marrow resisted your attempt to forcibly remove her, which would be their right, given she'd entered into a legal marriage arrangement, you burned their home to the ground. That sound about right? They murdered my men in defense of their lives and property, which, last I checked, isn't murder under territorial law. Hewitt closed his notebook. Here's what I think happened, Mr. Crow. I think you found out about a silver claim on this land. I think you wanted it for yourself. I think you cooked up a story about having a prior claim to Miss Marrow as an excuse to come up here with force. When that didn't work, you tried to burn them out. And when that failed too, you came crying to me hoping I'd finish the job for you. Oui? That's outrageous. I'm a respected businessman. You're a land grabber with expensive lawyers. Hewitt's voice hardened. I've dealt with men like you before. The only difference between you and a common thief is the quality of your suit. He turned to his deputies. Mount up. We're done here. What? Crow's voice was shrill. You're just going to let them go. They defended themselves against an illegal attack on their property. If you want to pursue this in civil court, that's your right. But as far as criminal charges go, there's nothing here. Well, Hewitt swung up onto his horse. Mr. Hale, Miss Marrow, you're free to continue your lives. I'd suggest keeping better records of your land claim, just in case Mr. Crow decides to challenge it legally. Marshal, Rowan said, thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't make me come back up here. Hewitt tipped his hat to me. Miss Marrow, if you ever decide this mountain life isn't for you, there's always work in town for a woman who can handle herself the way you clearly can. I appreciate that, Marshal, but I'm staying right here. Figured as much. He nodded to his deputies, and they started back down the trail. Crow sat his horse for a moment longer, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, he said. You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll bury you both. You tried that already, I said. Didn't take. He stared at me, at Rowan, at the half-built cabin that represented everything he'd failed to destroy. Then he turned his horse and rode after the marshal, his back rigid with wounded pride. We watched them go in silence. When they were finally out of sight, I felt my knees go weak. Rowan caught my elbow, steadying me. Easy, he said. I thought we were done. I thought he was going to arrest us. So did I. Rowan's voice was rough with relief. Guess we got lucky. Or the marshal was a decent man who could smell a rat. Either way, we're still here. That's what matters. but the relief was short-lived. 2 days later, as we were working on framing the new cabin's walls, I heard horses again, multiple riders moving fast. "Not again," I said, reaching for my rifle. Rowan was already scanning the trail. "That's not Crow. Wrong direction. They're coming from the north." The riders burst into the clearing, 6 men, rough-looking and hard-eyed, with the kind of weapons that weren't meant for hunting game. They spread out quickly, professionally, cutting off escape routes. And at their center, looking satisfied and vicious, was Victor Crow. "Surprised to see me?" he called out. "The marshal might have bought your story, but I don't give up that easy. These gentlemen aren't bound by inconvenient things like laws or evidence. They're here to solve my problem, permanently." "You're making a mistake," Rowan said, his voice deadly calm. "No. You made the mistake. You humiliated me, burned my reputation, made me look like a fool." Crow's smile was cold. "Now I'm going to return the favor. Boys, I want them alive, at least at first. I want them to watch everything they've built burn again. Then you can kill them." The hired guns dismounted, spreading out, weapons ready. These weren't townsmen or reluctant employees. These were professional killers, men who did this for money and didn't care about the reasons. "Delia," Rowan said quietly, "remember what we practiced? Fall back to the rocks, use the high ground, make them pay for every inch. Good girl." He shifted his rifle. "On my mark, we run. Don't stop, don't look back, just run." "Together," I said. "Together." The first shot came from one of Crow's men, a warning shot that kicked up dirt at our feet. Rowan returned fire, and the clearing exploded into chaos. We ran. Bullets chased us up the slope, chipping rock, tearing through brush. I stumbled once, my dress catching on something, and Rowan hauled me up without breaking stride. We reached the rocky outcrop we'd scouted weeks ago, the same one where we'd made our stand against Crow's first attack. "Here," Rowan panted, pulling me behind a boulder. "Reload! Get ready!" My hands were shaking, but I managed to reload my rifle. Below us, Crow's men were advancing, using cover, moving with the practiced coordination of experienced fighters. "This is bad," I said. "Yeah," but Rowan sighted down his barrel. "But we've been through worse." "When?" "Give me a minute. I'll think of something." Despite everything, the fear, the danger, the very real possibility we were about to die, I almost laughed. The fight that followed was brutal and desperate. We had position and determination, but they had numbers and experience. Rowan picked off 2 men in the first exchange, but the others adapted quickly, finding cover, coordinating their approach. A bullet cracked past my head so close I felt the wind of it. I returned fire blindly, not sure if I hit anything, just trying to keep them pinned down. "We can't hold here forever," Rowan said between shots. "We're going to run out of ammunition." "How much do you have left?" "Maybe 20 rounds. You?" 15. "That's not enough." He risked a glance over the boulder, immediately jerking back as bullets sparked off the stone. "They're trying to flank us. East side." I looked where he indicated and saw movement. 2 men, circling wide, trying to get above us. If they succeeded, our position would be worthless. "I'll take them," I said. "Delia, you hold the front. I'll stop the flank. That's the plan, right? Trust each other?" He looked at me, his face streaked with dirt and gunpowder, something fierce and proud in his eyes. "Don't die. Same to you." I moved quickly along the rocks, keeping low, using every scrap of cover. The 2 flanking men were focused on the climb, not expecting resistance from this angle. I got within 30 yards before the first one spotted me. His eyes widened in surprise, and he started to bring his rifle around. I fired first. He went down, and his partner dove for cover, returning fire. Bullets chipped the rock next to my head, and I felt something sting my cheek. Rock fragments, probably, or maybe a graze. I didn't have time to check. I fired again, missed, fired a 3rd time. The man screamed and fell, tumbling down the slope in a tangle of limbs and loose rock. Behind me, Rowan's rifle barked steadily, measured shots, each one purposeful. But the answering fire was increasing, getting closer. We were running out of time and ammunition. I scrambled back to our position, sliding in next to Rowan. Flanks clear. For now. His face was grim. But we're down to single digits on ammo. This has to end soon, one way or another. Below us, Crow was shouting orders, his voice shrill with frustration. His professional killers weren't so professional anymore. We'd cut their numbers in half, and the survivors were getting cautious, unwilling to charge into certain death, even for Crow's money. One more push, Rowan said. That's all they've got left in them. After that, they'll either break or we will. What do we do? He checked his rifle, his jaw set. We make them earn it. Every inch, every second. We fight until we can't fight anymore. I nodded, checking my own weapon. 12 rounds left. 12 chances to survive, to protect what we'd built, to prove that we deserved the life we'd chosen. The push came at sunset. 3 men charging together, laying down suppressing fire while they advanced. Rowan dropped the first one, I got the second, but the third made it to our position. He was young, maybe 25, with dead eyes and quick hands. He hit Rowan with the butt of his rifle, sending him sprawling, then turned toward me. I didn't think. I just moved. The knife Rowan had given me, the one I'd practiced with for hours, felt natural in my hand. The man saw it coming and tried to dodge, but he was off balance from his swing at Rowan. My blade caught him in the throat, and he went down choking, blood spreading across his shirt. I stood over him, breathing hard, the knife still in my hand, watching the light fade from his eyes. Delia. Rowan's voice, rough and pained. I turned to find him struggling to sit up, blood running from a cut on his forehead. You okay? Yes. You? I'll live. He wiped blood from his eyes. Help me up. I pulled him to his feet, and we stood together, looking down at the clearing. 2 men left besides Crow, and both of them looked like they were reconsidering their life choices. Crow was screaming at them, demanding they finish the job, but the heart had gone out of his hired guns. They'd come here expecting an easy payday, not a war against 2 people who refused to die. One of them threw down his rifle. I didn't sign up for this. Find someone else to die for your damn land claim. The other man looked at Crow, at us, at his dead companions scattered across the slope. Then he mounted his horse and rode away without a word. That left just Crow. He stood alone in the clearing, his expensive clothes torn and dirty, his face twisted with impotent rage. He drew a pistol from his belt, hands shaking with fury or fear or both. "You've ruined me," he screamed. "My reputation, my business, everything. All for what? For this worthless piece of rock? For her?" He aimed the pistol at me, and I saw the moment his decision crystallized. If he couldn't have victory, he'd have revenge. Time seemed to slow. I saw Rowan reaching for his rifle, knew he wouldn't be fast enough. Saw Crow's finger tightening on the trigger, saw the hatred in his eyes. And I made my choice. My rifle was still in my hands, loaded with one of my last precious bullets. I brought it up smooth and fast, muscle memory from weeks of practice taking over, and fired. The shot took Crow in the chest. He staggered backward, surprised, his pistol firing wild into the dirt. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then up at me, his expression almost confused. "You—" he started to say, then collapsed. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the wind in the pines and my own ragged breathing. I lowered my rifle, watching Crow's body, waiting for him to move, to get up, to somehow continue being the threat he'd been for months. He didn't move. "It's over," Rowan said quietly. "He's dead." I knew that. I could see it, but knowing and accepting were different things. I'd killed before, in the chaos of the first fight, in the desperation of survival. But this was different. This was deliberate, personal, final. I'd looked Victor Crow in the eyes and ended his life, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no regret, no horror at what I'd done. Just relief that it was finished. "Delia?" Rowan's hand on my shoulder, gentle but grounding. "Talk to me." "I'm fine." "You just killed a man." "Yes, I did." I looked at him. Should I feel worse about it? I don't know. Do you? I thought about it honestly. Victor Crow had tried to destroy us, tried to burn us out, tried to have us killed. He'd brought violence to our home again and again, refusing to accept defeat, refusing to let us live in peace. No, I said finally. I don't feel bad. He made his choices. I made mine. That's all there is to it. Rowan studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. Just okay? You did what needed doing. No shame in that. He looked at the bodies scattered across the clearing. We should bury them, before the scavengers come. It took hours to dig graves in the rocky ground, and by the time we finished, full dark had fallen. We buried them without ceremony or words, just filled in the holes and marked them with stones so we'd know where they were. Crow we buried last, away from his men, alone the way he'd died. When it was done, we stood in the dark, exhausted and bloody and alive. It's really over now, I said. Yeah, it is. What do we do next? Rowan looked at the half-built cabin, at the rocky outcrop that would be our new home, at the mountains rising dark against the stars. We finish what we started, he said. We build, we survive, we live. I took his hand, scarred and calloused and strong, and squeezed it once. Together, I said. Together, he agreed. And as we walked back toward our future, leaving the dead behind us, I felt something shift inside me, something that had been broken since that day in Copper Ridge, since the laughter and the shame and the feeling of being utterly worthless. I wasn't that woman anymore. I'd been forged in fire, tested in blood, and I'd proven, to myself if no one else, that I was strong enough to defend what I'd built. No one would ever take that from me again. The morning after we buried Victor Crow, I woke with blood on my hands. Not metaphorically, actual dried blood caked under my fingernails, smeared across my palms where I'd gripped the shovel, dark crescents that no amount of scrubbing the night before had completely removed. I sat in the lean-to, staring at my hands in the early light, and realized they didn't shake. A woman who'd killed a man the day before should have shaking hands, should have nightmares, should feel something other than this strange, hollow calm. You're up early, Rowan's voice came from the doorway. He looked like hell. The cut on his forehead had scabbed over badly, his ribs were still wrapped tight, and he moved like every muscle hurt, which they probably did. Couldn't sleep. Yeah, me neither. He came in, sat down next to me. His own hands were just as stained as mine. We should go into town. I looked at him. Why? Because people are going to notice when Crow doesn't come back. Better we tell our version first than let rumors fill in the gaps. Our version being that I shot him? Our version being the truth. That he came here with hired guns to kill us, and we defended ourselves. Again. Rowan's voice was steady, but I could hear the concern underneath. The marshal knows Crow was dirty. If we're honest about what happened, he'll back us up. And if he doesn't, then we'll deal with it. But hiding up here won't help anything. It'll just make us look guilty. He was right, even though I didn't want him to be. I wanted to stay here in our half-built sanctuary, pretend the world beyond these mountains didn't exist, didn't have opinions or laws or consequences. But that wasn't how life worked. When do we leave? I asked. Tomorrow. That'll give us today to clean up, get our story straight, make ourselves presentable. He paused. And maybe take care of those hands. You keep picking at the blood, and you'll draw fresh. I looked down, realizing I'd been scratching at the stains without thinking. It won't come out. Sure it will. Just takes time and soap and patience. He stood, wincing. Come on. There's a bar of lye soap in what's left of the supplies. We'll both scrub up, change into whatever clean clothes we've got left. Face this thing properly. We spent the day preparing like we were going to war instead of town. Rowan cleaned both rifles meticulously. Though we wouldn't be bringing them, walking into Copper Ridge armed after killing 9 men seemed like poor strategy. I mended the least damaged of my dresses, the dark blue one that didn't show every stain, and tried to do something with my hair that didn't scream, mountain woman who just survived multiple assassination attempts. The results were mixed at best. You look fine, Rowan said that evening, catching me trying to see my reflection in a tin plate. I look like I've been dragged backwards through hell. You have been. But you came out the other side. That counts for something. He'd changed into what must have been his only remaining good shirt, dark wool that hid most of the dirt and damage. His beard was trimmed, his hair pulled back. He looked almost civilized, if you didn't notice the scars or the way his eyes constantly scanned for threats. We rode out at dawn, sharing Rowan's horse since mine had been lost in the chaos of Crow's attacks. The trail down was easier than the trail up had been all those months ago, but I still gripped Rowan's waist tight, my stomach churning with something that wasn't quite fear but wasn't confidence either. "What do I say?" I asked as the town came into view below us. "When people ask?" "The truth. You defended your home, defended me, defended yourself. Nothing shameful in any of that. What if they don't see it that way? Then they're wrong." His voice was firm, "and we'll deal with it together." Copper Ridge looked exactly the same as the day I'd left. Same dusty main street, same leaning buildings, same mountains looming in the background. But I was different. The woman who'd stood in line waiting to be chosen, who'd accepted mockery and humiliation because she didn't know she had any other option, she was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, less willing to bend. We tied the horse in front of the marshal's office, and I saw curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. Word of our arrival was spreading fast. By the time we walked through the marshal's door, half the town would know we were here. Marshal Hewitt looked up from his desk, his weathered face showing no surprise. "Mr. Hale, Miss Marrow, I was wondering when you'd show up." "You heard then," Rowan said. "Hard not to. When a prominent businessman and 6 hired guns don't come back from a trip into the mountains, people notice." Hewitt gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Sit. Tell me what happened." So we did. Every detail, every shot, every decision that had led to 9 men buried in mountain graves. I told him about shooting Crow, about the choice I'd made in that split second between his gun rising and mine firing. Hewitt listened without interrupting, making occasional notes in his ledger. When we finished, he sat back in his chair, studying us both. "That's quite a body count," he said finally. "They came to kill us," I said. "What were we supposed to do?" "Exactly what you did, probably." He tapped his pencil against the desk. "Problem is, Victor Crow had friends, rich friends, friends who aren't going to like hearing that some mountain man and his mail-order bride killed him, even if it was self-defense." "So we're being charged." Rowan's voice went flat, dangerous. "No, you're not." Hewitt opened a drawer and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Took the liberty of doing some investigating after our last conversation. Turns out Mr. Crow had quite the history. Land fraud, intimidation, at least 2 suspicious deaths of people who stood in his way. Nothing proven, of course. Men with that much money rarely see the inside of a courtroom." "Then why tell us?" I asked. "Because his friends are going to want someone to pay for his death. They're going to push for an investigation, maybe a trial. And I need you both to understand that while I believe your story, not everyone will." He slid the papers across the desk. "These are statements from the men who survived Crow's first attack, the ones who ran rather than burn with their employer. They're willing to testify that Crow initiated the violence, that he was obsessed with taking your land by any means necessary." Rowan picked up the papers, scanning them. "Why would they help us?" "Because they're scared. Scared that whoever hired them to come after you will decide they're loose ends that need tying up. Figured cooperating with the law was safer than staying loyal to a dead man." Hewitt leaned forward. "Point is, you've got evidence on your side. You've got witness statements. You've got a clear pattern of Crow's aggression. Any halfway competent judge will rule this justifiable homicide." "Halfway competent being the key phrase," Rowan said. "Yeah, that's the gamble." Hewitt pulled the papers back. "My recommendation? Go home. Keep your heads down. Let me handle the politics and the paperwork. If this goes to trial, and it might, I'll testify on your behalf. But until then, the less you're seen, the less ammunition Crow's friends have to paint you as dangerous criminals." "We came here to be honest," I said, "to tell people what happened before rumors did the talking for us. And you've done that. You've given me your statement, on record, with details I can verify. That's all you need to do." He stood, signaling the conversation was over. "One piece of advice, though, Miss Marrow, you might want to make that mail-order arrangement official. Married women have more legal protections than unmarried ones. Just something to consider." The suggestion hit like cold water. Marriage, to Rowan. Not for love or romance, but for legal protection, for the ability to claim rights that the law didn't extend to unwed women. I'll think about it, I said, standing. Thank you, Marshall. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. We left the office and stepped into bright sunlight and a street full of staring faces. People stood in clusters, whispering, pointing. I recognized some of them from that first day. Women who'd laughed, men who'd mocked. Their expressions now were different, less contempt, more uncertainty. Maybe fear. I'd become something they didn't know how to categorize. Not a victim, not a proper lady, not safely dismissed. Delia Marrow. The voice was familiar. I turned to see Sarah Pemberton hurrying toward us, her face bright with concern. I heard you were here. Are you all right? I'm fine, Sarah. She looked me over, the mended dress, the fading bruises, the way I held myself different than before. You don't look fine. You look like you've been through hell. That's because I have. I softened my tone. She'd tried to help, had sent warning when she didn't have to. That counted for something. But I came out the other side. That's what matters. Is it true? About Crow and his men? Which version have you heard? Half the town says you murdered them in cold blood. The other half says they came to kill you, and you fought back. Sarah glanced at Rowan, standing silent and watchful beside me. I'm hoping it's the second one. It is. We defended ourselves, that's all. Thank heaven. She gripped my hands, her face earnest. Delia, if you need anything, a place to stay, food, someone to speak on your behalf, please ask. You were kind to me on that wagon ride when you didn't have to be. I haven't forgotten. The offer touched something in me I'd thought had frozen solid. Thank you. That means more than you know. Will you come to dinner tonight? My husband and I would like to hear what really happened, and I think it would help if people saw you weren't monsters, that you're just people who survived. I looked at Rowan. He gave a tiny shrug. Your choice. All right, I said. What time? Sarah's smile was relieved. 6 o'clock, the White House on Oak Street, the one with the blue shutters. I'll make pot roast. After she left, Rowan and I walked to the general store for supplies. The owner, Mr. Henderson, greeted us with cautious politeness, taking our list and filling it without the commentary I'd expected. Heard about your trouble, he said as he wrapped our purchases. Must have been rough. It was, I said. Well, you're still standing. That says something. He handed over the parcels. These are on account. Pay when you can. We can pay now, Rowan started, reaching for coins. I said on account. Henderson's face was firm. You two have had enough taken from you. Let an old man do a decent thing for once. We left with our supplies and something that felt dangerously like hope. Dinner at the Pembertons' house was strange and uncomfortable and oddly normal all at once. Sarah's husband, Thomas, was a quiet man with kind eyes who asked careful questions and listened to our answers without judgment. The food was good. The first meal I'd eaten that I hadn't cooked myself in months. The conversation stayed carefully away from violence, focusing instead on the mountain, the building, our plans for the future. You're really going to stay up there? Thomas asked over coffee. After everything that's happened? Why wouldn't we? I said. Most people would take the hint. Find somewhere safer, easier. We're not most people. I looked at Rowan, who nodded slightly. That land is ours. We've bled for it, fought for it, buried our enemies in it. Walking away now would make all of that meaningless. That's a hard way to live, Sarah said softly. Better hard than empty. The words came out with more force than I'd intended. I spent 34 years living the way other people thought I should, being who they wanted me to be, making myself small and quiet and acceptable. It nearly killed me. I set down my cup. I'm not doing that anymore. I'd rather die on my feet in those mountains than live on my knees anywhere else. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. Finally, Thomas nodded. I can respect that, even if I don't fully understand it. You don't have to understand, Rowan said. You just have to let us live it. We left as darkness fell, Sarah pressing a basket of food into my hands for the journey back. Be careful, she said, and come visit again. When things settle down. I will, I promised, surprising myself by meaning it. The ride back up the mountain was quiet, both of us lost in thought. When we finally reached our half-built cabin, the stars were out and the temperature had dropped enough to see our breath. That went better than expected, Rowan said as we settled into the lean-to. Sarah was kind. I didn't expect that. People can surprise you sometimes. He was quiet for a moment, then, about what the marshal said, the marriage thing. My stomach tightened. What about it? He's right. Legally, it would protect you. Give you rights you don't have as an unwed woman living with a man, no matter what papers we signed back when you first came here. He wasn't looking at me, focusing instead on checking the fire. I'm not asking for anything to change between us. It would just be legal protection. Practical. Practical, I repeated. Yeah. And you'd be all right with that? Being married in law, even if not in other ways? He finally looked at me, his dark eyes steady in the firelight. Delia, I'd be honored to call you my wife in any capacity you'd allow. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You've saved my life more times than I can count. You've stood with me when you had every reason to run. If putting a legal stamp on what we already have means you're safer, more protected, then yes, I'd be more than all right with it. The words settled into me, warm and solid. This wasn't romance. This wasn't poetry or passion or any of the things the penny novels talked about. This was partnership, recognition, respect. It was better than romance. It was real. All right, I said. Let's do it. Yeah? Yeah. When we go back to town for whatever legal nonsense the marshal needs, we'll make it official. I looked at him across the fire. Partners in law as well as life. He smiled. That rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. Partners, he agreed. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. We worked on the cabin during the day, pushing ourselves hard to get it finished before the next winter came. The structure grew slowly but surely, walls rising, roof taking shape, windows fitted with precious glass Rowan had traded furs for. We didn't talk much about what had happened, about the men we'd killed, or the choices we'd made. But sometimes at night, lying in the dark, I'd hear Rowan's breathing change, too quick, too shallow, and know he was reliving it. Talk to me, I'd say softly. Sometimes he would. Sometimes he'd tell me about the war, about things he'd done and seen that still haunted him, about the cost of survival when survival meant violence. And sometimes I'd talk too. About my first husband, about the slow suffocation of being someone's servant instead of their partner, about the laughter in Copper Ridge, about the feeling of being utterly worthless. You were never worthless, Rowan said one night after I'd voiced that thought aloud. They just couldn't see your worth. There's a difference. How do you know? Because I see it, every day. In the way you don't quit, the way you stand your ground, the way you chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. He shifted in his bedroll. You're worth 10 of those people who laughed. 100. They were just too stupid to know it. The words shouldn't have mattered as much as they did, but they settled something in me that had been broken since before I could remember. 6 weeks after our trip to town, a rider came up the trail. Not hostile, just a young man with a legal summons. There would be an inquest into the deaths of Victor Crow and his men, scheduled for 2 weeks hence. Our presence was requested but not required, though the marshal strongly recommended we attend. Well, Rowan said after the messenger left. Here we go. Are you worried? Some. You? Strangely, no. I looked at the cabin, nearly finished now, solid and strong and built to last. I know what I did. I know why I did it. If a judge and jury can't understand that, that's their failure, not mine. That's a bold stance to take when your life might be on the line. Maybe. But I'm tired of being afraid of what other people think. I turned to face him. I killed a man who was trying to kill me. If that makes me a criminal in their eyes, so be it, but I won't apologize for surviving. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we'll go. We'll tell the truth. And whatever happens, happens. Together? Always. We spent the next 2 weeks finishing the cabin, driving ourselves hard, working dawn to dusk, and sometimes beyond. It was as if we both needed to see it completed, to have something solid and permanent before we faced whatever judgment waited in town. The day before we were scheduled to leave, Rowan called me outside. "Come here. Want to show you something." I followed him to the front of the cabin, where he'd been working on something I thought was just decorative trim above the door. It was a carving, rough but clear. Two names intertwined, Rowan and Delia. And below them, a date, April 1876. "When we first met," he said, "the day you chose to stay." I stared at the carving, feeling something crack open in my chest. It's beautiful. It's permanent, like what we built here, like what we are to each other. He looked at me, his expression serious. "Whatever happens in town, whatever that inquest decides, this is ours. This cabin, this land, this life. They can't take that away unless we let them." I reached out and traced the carved letters with my fingers. Rowan and Delia. Partners. Survivors. Something more than either word could capture. "They're not taking anything," I said. "Not again. Not ever." We rode into Copper Ridge the next morning with our heads high and our story straight. The inquest was held in the town hall, packed with curious onlookers and Crow's well-dressed associates from Denver, all of them looking at us like we were fascinating specimens in a jar. The judge was old, severe, with white whiskers and cold eyes. He listened to the marshal's testimony, to the statements from Crow's surviving men, to the physical evidence of burned buildings and fresh graves. Then he called me to testify. I stood before that room full of strangers and told them exactly what had happened. I didn't soften it. I didn't make excuses. I told them about being unwanted and mocked, about finding a home in the mountains, about Crow's attacks and final assault, about raising my rifle and making the choice to end his life before he could end mine. "And do you regret it?" the judge asked when I finished. "Killing Mr. Crow?" The room went silent, waiting for my answer. I thought about lying, about giving them the remorse they clearly wanted to hear, about making myself smaller and more palatable. Then I thought about the woman who'd stood in line waiting to be chosen, who'd accepted humiliation because she thought she deserved it. I wasn't her anymore. "No," I said clearly, "I don't regret it. He came to my home with hired killers. He burned my life down twice. He tried to take everything I'd built, everything I'd become. I regret that it came to violence. I regret that men died. But I don't regret surviving, and I don't regret defending what was mine." The judge's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Marrow. You may step down." The deliberation took less than an hour. When the judge returned, his face was grim. "This court finds that the deaths of Victor Crow and his associates were the result of justifiable homicide in defense of life and property. No charges will be filed against Rowan Hale or Cordelia Marrow. This inquest is closed." The gavel fell, and just like that, it was over. Crow's associates looked furious, already gathering in angry clusters to discuss appeals and legal challenges. But the marshal was smiling, shaking Rowan's hand, congratulating us on our vindication. "You're free to go," Hewitt said. "Build your life, be happy, and for the love of all that's decent, try not to kill anyone else for at least a few years." "We'll do our best," Rowan said dryly. We walked out of that courthouse into afternoon sunlight, and I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of judgment, of consequences, of wondering if we'd done wrong, all of it lifted. We'd defended ourselves. The law had agreed. We were free. "Want to make that marriage official while we're here?" Rowan asked as we stood in the street. "Seems like a good day for it." I looked at him, scarred and solid and absolutely certain in a way I'd never been about anything in my life. "Yeah," I said. "Let's do it." We found a minister, a kind-faced woman who asked no questions about the unusual circumstances and married us in her parlor with her husband and Sarah Pemberton as witnesses. The ceremony was brief, the words simple, the vows practical rather than poetic. But when Rowan slipped a plain silver band onto my finger, one he'd forged himself from the mountain silver, he told me later, it felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. "I promise to stand with you," he said, "to fight beside you, to build this life we've chosen together, until I can't anymore." I promise the same. I said, and I promise that whatever comes next, we face it as equals, as partners, as what we've always been. The minister pronounced us married, and Rowan kissed me, chaste and quick and somehow perfect in its simplicity. We were married. Legally, officially, irrevocably bound. And for the first time in my life, being bound to someone didn't feel like a chain. It felt like freedom. We stayed in town one more night, celebrating quietly with Sarah and Thomas, accepting congratulations from townspeople who'd decided we were acceptable after all. Then we rode back up the mountain to our finished cabin, our legal marriage, our hard-won life. The cabin was perfect in the way imperfect things are, solid and real and built by our own hands. We stood in front of it as the sun set, looking at what we'd created from nothing but determination and refusal to quit. "It's beautiful," I said. "It's ours," Rowan corrected. "That's what makes it beautiful." We went inside, lit the fire in the new hearth, and sat together in the home we'd built and defended and earned through blood and stubbornness. Outside, the mountain stood eternal and indifferent. Inside, we were finally truly home. And no one, not the law, not society, not anyone, could take that from us again. The first winter in the new cabin was harder than the one before, but different. We knew what to expect this time: the bone-deep cold, the isolation, the way the snow could trap you for days at a time. But we also knew each other, knew how to work together, how to fill the silence without needing constant conversation. I learned to read Rowan's moods by the set of his shoulders, the way he held his coffee cup, whether he checked the rifle once or 3 times before settling in for the night. He learned mine too. When I needed space to think, when I needed distraction, when the memories of what we'd done and survived threatened to swallow me whole. We didn't talk about it much, the killing, but it was there between us, a shared understanding that we'd crossed lines most people never have to cross. We'd looked other human beings in the eyes and ended their lives. That changed you, made you different from people who'd never had to make those choices. "Do you think we're broken?" I asked one night in January, watching the fire while snow piled up outside. Rowan looked up from the trap he was mending. "What do you mean? Normal people don't do what we did. Normal people don't kill 9 men and then just keep living, keep building, keep going like nothing happened." He was quiet for a long moment, his rough hand still on the trap's mechanism. "I don't think we're broken. I think we're survivors. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yeah." He set down the trap. "Broken means you can't function anymore. Can't live, can't work, can't find any meaning in anything. We're not that. We're changed, sure, marked by what we've been through, but we're still here, still choosing to wake up every day and make something of this life. Even if that life includes blood on our hands? Especially then." His eyes met mine across the firelight. "The world isn't kind, Delia. It's not fair or just or forgiving. Sometimes the only choice you get is between dying with your principles intact or living with compromised ones. We chose to live. I can't regret that." "I don't regret it either. That's what scares me." "Why should it scare you?" "Because shouldn't I feel worse? Shouldn't I be haunted, broken down, consumed by guilt?" I looked at my hands, calloused now, scarred in places, strong in ways they'd never been before. Instead, I just feel relief that it's over, that we won. Rowan moved to sit beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. "You want to know what I think?" "Always." I think you're confusing remorse with weakness. You're not sorry you survived, and that makes you think something's wrong with you. But there's nothing wrong with wanting to live, with fighting for that right. The men we killed made their choices. They came to our home with violence. We responded in kind. That's not murder, Delia. That's nature, raw and ugly and honest. "Nature," I repeated. "Yeah. A wolf doesn't apologize for defending its den. A bear doesn't feel guilty for protecting its territory. We're animals too, under all the civilization and law and propriety. Sometimes we have to remember that." It should have been cold comfort, reducing what we'd done to animal instinct. But instead it settled something in me that had been restless and uncertain. We weren't monsters. We were survivors who'd done what needed doing. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For not making me feel wrong for being strong." He put his arm around me, and I leaned into his warmth. We sat like that for a long time, watching the fire, listening to the wind, two people who'd found something in each other that the world had tried to beat out of both of us. Spring came eventually, the way it always does. The snow melted in rushing streams, the wildflowers returned, and the world seemed determined to prove that life persists no matter how hard winter tries to kill it. We planted a garden that year, a real one, not just the scraggly vegetables Rowan had managed before. I'd found seed packets in town, traded some of the silver from the mine for them, and now neat rows of potatoes, beans, and squash pushed up through the dark earth. "You've got a talent for this," Rowan said one morning, watching me tend the plants. "My mother had a garden. Before she died, before everything fell apart, I used to help her." The memory was old and faded, but not painful anymore. Just there, a piece of who I'd been before the world taught me to be small. "You never talk about your family." "Not much to tell. Mother died when I was 14. Father drank himself to death 2 years later. My husband was the only family I had after that, and he was functional. Not cruel, not particularly kind, just there." I pulled a weed, tossed it aside. I spent 20 years being functional, being there, never really living, just existing. And now? I looked around, at the cabin we'd built, at the mountains rising on all sides, at the garden growing under my hands. Now I'm living, finally. The mine was producing well that summer. Rowan had been right. The vein ran deeper than Crow had known, rich enough to provide real income if we worked it carefully. We established a routine. Rowan would spend mornings in the mine, afternoons hunting or working the land. I'd tend the garden, preserve food, and handle the business side, keeping records, calculating what we could sell and what we needed to keep. It was partnership in the truest sense, not romantic in the traditional way. We still slept separately, still maintained the boundaries we'd established early on. But we were building something together, something that belonged to both of us equally. "You ever think about going back?" Rowan asked one evening as we sat on the porch we'd added to the cabin. "To the life you had before?" "Never." The answer came without hesitation. "That woman doesn't exist anymore. She died somewhere between Copper Ridge and here, and I don't mourn her." "That's cold. That's honest." I looked at him. "Do you ever regret bringing me here? Taking on someone else's problems?" "You're not someone else's problems. You're my partner. And no, I don't regret it. Best decision I ever made, choosing you that day. Even with everything that came after? Especially with everything that came after. Easy choices don't forge anything worth keeping." The words settled into me, solid and true. We'd been forged in fire, the two of us, hammered and shaped by violence and survival until we'd become something new, something stronger than either of us had been alone. In late summer, Sarah Pemberton came to visit. We'd stayed in touch through occasional letters, and she'd been asking to see the cabin, to see how we lived. Rowan had been reluctant. Our life was private, hard-won, not something to put on display. But I'd convinced him that Sarah was different, that she'd earned the right to see what her warnings and friendship had helped protect. She arrived on a borrowed horse, looking out of place in her town clothes and carefully arranged hair. But when she saw the cabin, saw the garden and the life we'd built, her expression transformed from polite interest to genuine wonder. "Delia, this is incredible," she said, walking slowly around the property. "You built all this?" "We built it, together." I showed her the garden, the smokehouse, the improvements we'd made to the lean-to. "It's not fancy, but it's ours." "It's more than that. It's proof." Sarah touched the cabin's solid log walls. "Proof that you can survive anything if you're strong enough. That you don't need to fit into anyone's idea of what a woman should be. Is that what you see?" "That's what everyone sees. You've become something of a legend in town, you know. The woman who fought off an army, who refused to be claimed or controlled." She smiled. "The young girls especially, they ask about you, want to know if the stories are true." "What stories?" "That you killed Victor Crow yourself, that you stood your ground when any reasonable person would have run, that you chose this hard life because it was yours to choose." Sarah looked at me seriously. "You've given them something to aspire to. permission to be strong instead of acceptable. The thought made me uncomfortable. I wasn't trying to be anyone's example, wasn't looking to inspire or lead. I was just living the only way that made sense to me. I'm not a hero, I said. I'm just someone who refused to die quietly. Sometimes that's the same thing. We had dinner that night, all three of us, with Sarah asking questions about the mine, the land, our plans for the future. Rowan warmed to her eventually, his natural suspicion easing when he realized she wasn't here to judge or pry, just to understand. "You're good for each other," Sarah said as the evening wound down. "I can see it. The way you move around each other, anticipate needs, work together. It's partnership in the truest sense." "That's what it is," Rowan agreed. "Nothing more complicated than that. Nothing more necessary either," I added. After Sarah left the next morning with promises to visit again, Rowan and I stood on the porch watching her ride down the mountain. "She's not wrong," he said, "about us being good for each other. No, she's not. You happy, Delia? Truly happy with this life?" I thought about the question honestly. Was I happy? I worked harder than I ever had. My body ached constantly, and I carried the weight of having taken lives. The isolation was real, the challenges endless, the comfort minimal. But I was free. Free to make my own choices, to be strong without apology, to build a life that belonged to no one but me and the man I'd chosen to build it with. "Yes," I said, "I'm happy. Are you?" "More than I've been in 20 years. He pulled me close, a gesture that had become natural over the months. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost in the war." "What's that?" "Purpose. A reason to keep going that isn't just stubborn refusal to die." We stood there together as the sun set over the mountains. Two people who'd found in each other what the rest of the world had tried to deny them: worth, partnership, the right to exist on their own terms. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were ours. We expanded the cabin, added rooms as we needed them. The mine produced steadily, enough to provide comfortable income without making us rich enough to attract new predators. The garden flourished under my care, and I learned to preserve enough food to see us through even the hardest winters. We made occasional trips to town, less frequent as time went on. Each time we went, people treated us with a mixture of respect and wariness, recognition that we were different, that we'd crossed lines and survived things that marked us as separate from ordinary society. I didn't mind being separate. Separate meant free. 3 years after we'd buried Victor Crow, a lawyer appeared at our door. Young, nervous, clutching a leather satchel like it might protect him from whatever dangers he'd heard about. "Mr. and Mrs. Hale?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "That's us," Rowan said, rifle held casually but obviously. "What do you want?" "I represent the Crow estate. I've been authorized to make you an offer for this property." The words hung in the air like a threat. I felt Rowan tense beside me, saw his hand tighten on the rifle. "Not interested," I said flatly. "You haven't heard the offer yet. It's quite generous, more than this land is worth, honestly. The family wants to put this unfortunate business behind them, and they're willing to pay." "No." My voice was hard. "This land isn't for sale. Not to the Crows, not to anyone. We've bled for it, died for it, built our lives on it. It's ours. Tell the family that if they send anyone else up here with offers or threats or anything else, they'll get the same reception their patriarch got." The lawyer's face went white. "Are you threatening? I'm stating facts. This is our home. We will defend it. Leave now and don't come back." He left quickly, nearly stumbling in his haste to reach his horse. Rowan watched him go with grim satisfaction. "Think they'll try again?" he asked. "Maybe, but we'll be ready if they do." They didn't try again. Word must have spread that we were serious, that we weren't people who could be bought or intimidated or moved. The Crow family's lawyers found other properties to acquire, other mountains to mine. We were left alone, which was all we'd ever wanted. 5 years after that first day in Copper Ridge, I stood on our porch watching the sunrise over the mountains and realized something profound. I was 40 years old. My hair was going gray, my body showed every year of hard labor, and my hands were permanently roughened from work. I'd never been more beautiful, not beautiful in the way the world measured such things. I was heavier than ever, scarred in places, my face weathered by sun and wind. But I was strong, capable, free. I'd built a life with my own hands and defended it with my own will. That was worth more than any conventional beauty. Rowan came out to join me, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He looked older too, more gray in his beard, deeper lines around his eyes, but solid, present, real. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, handing me a cup. "How far we've come. How different things are from that day in town." "Regrets?" "Not a single one." I sipped the terrible coffee, savoring its familiar bitterness. "You? Only that I didn't find you sooner, that you had to waste years on men who didn't see your worth." Maybe I needed those years. Maybe I wouldn't have been ready for this life if I hadn't lived that one first. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. "Delia? Yeah? I love you. I know we don't talk like that. Know we built this on partnership and practicality, but I need you to know it anyway. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." The words should have shocked me, should have changed something fundamental between us. But they didn't. They just confirmed what I'd known for years, what had been growing quietly in the spaces between survival and partnership. "I love you too," I said, though I suspect we have different definitions of the word than most people. Probably, but ours works better. It does. I leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady presence that had become as necessary as breathing. We work better. We stood there as the sun climbed higher, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. Below us, the valley spread out green and wild and untamed. Our garden grew in neat rows. Our cabin stood solid against the elements. Our life continued day by day, season by season. It wasn't the life I'd imagined as a young girl dreaming of romance and rescue. It was better. It was real. That winter, our 6th together, was brutal. The snow came early and stayed late, piling higher than we'd ever seen it. We were trapped in the cabin for weeks at a time, supplies running low, firewood carefully rationed. "We might not make it," Rowan said one particularly cold night, looking at our dwindling stores. "We'll make it. We always do." "Delia, be realistic. We've got maybe 3 weeks of food left and the snow shows no sign of stopping. Then we'll ration better, hunt if we have to, do whatever it takes." I looked at him across the fire, seeing the worry in his eyes. "You taught me something important, Rowan. You taught me that survival isn't about being comfortable or safe. It's about being willing to endure whatever comes. So that's what we'll do. We'll endure." "You're the strongest person I've ever known." "No, I'm just the most stubborn. There's a difference." He laughed, tired but genuine. "Maybe stubbornness is just strength by another name." We made it through that winter, though it was close. By the time spring finally broke, we were down to dried beans and the last of the preserved venison. But we were alive. We were together, and we'd proven once again that we could survive anything the world threw at us. I was 42 when Sarah wrote to tell me she was pregnant. The letter was full of joy and terror in equal measure, asking for advice I wasn't sure I could give. "What do I tell her?" I asked Rowan, rereading the letter for the 3rd time. "The truth. That being afraid is normal. That she'll figure it out. That strength comes from pushing through fear, not from never feeling it." So that's what I wrote back. And over the months that followed, Sarah and I exchanged letters about motherhood, partnership, the ways women find strength in impossible circumstances. Her baby, a girl, was born healthy that fall. They named her Cordelia, after me. I cried when I read that news, though I couldn't quite say why. Maybe because it meant something I'd done, some choice I'd made, had mattered to someone beyond just my own survival. Maybe because it proved that refusing to be small could echo outward, could give other women permission to be large. Or maybe I just cried because someone thought I was worth naming their daughter after. The silver mine lasted another 4 years before it played out. We'd known it was coming, the vein getting thinner, the yields decreasing. By the time we extracted the last worthwhile ore, we'd saved enough to live comfortably for years. "What now, Wasso?" Rowan asked, standing in the empty mine shaft for the last time. "Now we live off the land like we always have. The mine was never the point. The life was." "You don't regret it?" All that silver, all that wealth. We could have pushed harder, gotten more, and risked attracting more attention, more people like Crow who'd want to take what we'd found. I shook my head. We took what we needed. That's enough. We sealed the mine entrance, hiding it from casual discovery. Let the mountain keep its remaining secrets. We had enough. I was 48 when Marshall Hewitt died. Word came from town, and though we hadn't been close, I felt the loss. He'd been one of the few people in authority who'd treated us fairly, who'd looked past the blood and violence to see the truth underneath. We rode to town for the funeral, standing at the back of the church, while the whole town mourned. Afterward, his son, now the new marshal, found us. He wanted you to have this, the younger Hewitt said, handing me a worn journal. His personal notes from your case said if anything ever happened to him, you should have the proof of what really occurred, just in case anyone ever tried to rewrite history. I took the journal, feeling the weight of it. Thank you. Your father was a good man. He said the same about both of you, said you'd done what needed doing and didn't apologize for it. He respected that. We left town with the journal safely stored in our saddlebags, one more piece of evidence that we'd lived, we'd fought, we'd survived, that our story was real, not sanitized or forgotten or buried under polite lies. The years continued their steady march. We aged together, our bodies showing the accumulated damage of hard living, but our spirits still strong. The cabin needed constant maintenance, the land constant work, but it was our work, our maintenance, our life. I was 53 when Rowan got sick. It started small, a cough that wouldn't quit, tiredness that sleep didn't fix. By the time we admitted something was seriously wrong, he was coughing blood. It's the mine, the doctor in town said after examining him. The dust, the bad air. I've seen it before. There's no cure. How long? I asked, my voice steady even as my world tilted. Could be months. Could be years. Depends on how strong he is. He's the strongest man I know. Then maybe years. But Delia, the doctor knew us well enough to use first names by now. There's no fixing this, only managing it. I took Rowan home and we faced this new reality the way we'd faced everything else. Together, honestly, without pretty lies or false hope. I'm sorry, he said one night, the cough finally easing enough to talk. Sorry I'm leaving you like this. You're not leaving yet, and when you do, you'll have given me 20 years I wouldn't have had otherwise. I took his hand, feeling how thin it had become. Don't apologize for being human, Rowan. Don't apologize for dying when you've spent your whole life teaching me how to live. You'll be alone again. I've been alone before. I know how to handle it. I squeezed his hand gently, but I won't be the same kind of alone I was before you. That woman was lost, desperate, willing to accept scraps. This woman, the one you helped create, she's strong enough to survive anything, even losing you. He smiled, weak but genuine. There she is, the woman who stood her ground when everyone else ran. You taught me that. No, I just helped you remember what you'd always been. He lasted another year and a half, 18 months of watching him fade, of measuring out medicine, of sitting with him through the bad nights when the cough tore through him like violence, but also 18 months of quiet conversations, of shared memories, of holding hands and watching sunsets and being present for each other in the most fundamental way. The day he died was quiet. Spring again, the world renewing itself while he let go. I held his hand as his breathing slowed, then stopped, as the man who'd chosen me when no one else would finally left this world for whatever came next. I buried him on the hill above the cabin, in sight of the mountains he'd loved, with a marker I carved myself. Simple words. Rowan Hale, partner, survivor, loved. And then I was alone again. But this time, being alone felt different. I wasn't the desperate widow, the unwanted bride, the woman trading survival for dignity. I was Delia Hale, survivor of battles and sieges, builder of homes and lives, woman who'd looked death in the face more than once and refused to blink. I was 55 years old, alone on a mountain, with nothing but the life I'd built and the strength I'd earned. And I was free. The months after Rowan's death were hard in ways I hadn't expected. Not because I couldn't manage the work. I could, had been managing most of it anyway as he'd weakened, but because the silence was different now. Before it had been comfortable, companionable, now it was just empty. But I endured, because that's what I did. Sarah visited that summer, bringing her daughter, 14 now, all awkward limbs and fierce questions. "Is it true you killed a man?" young Cordelia asked, direct in the way only teenagers can be. "Yes." "Do you regret it?" I thought about the question honestly. Did I regret shooting Victor Crow? Ending his life to preserve my own? "No," I said. "He gave me a choice between his life and mine. I chose mine. I'd make the same choice again." "Good," the girl said firmly. "My mother says you taught her that women don't have to accept what the world gives them, that we can fight back." "Your mother's right, but fighting back comes with a cost. You need to be willing to pay it." "What's the cost?" "Being different, being separate, being someone people don't quite know how to handle." I looked at this young woman carrying my name, wondering what kind of life she'd build. The world wants women to be small and quiet and grateful for scraps. If you refuse, if you choose to be large and loud and demanding, you'll pay for it. The question is whether the price is worth what you gain. Is it? Worth it? I looked around at my cabin, my land, my hard-won life. Every single day. I was 58 when the last of Crow's family finally gave up trying to claim my land. A lawyer came one final time, not with offers, but with papers officially releasing any claim the Crow estate had ever made. The silver was played out anyway, the land too remote and difficult to be worth the continued legal battles. I signed the papers and watched the lawyer ride away for the last time. The land was mine, uncontested, forever. I'd won, completely. Finally. That night I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey Rowan had been saving for something special, watching the stars come out over the mountains, and I thought about the woman I'd been. The one who'd stood in line in Copper Ridge, accepting mockery and humiliation because she thought that was all she deserved. The one who'd been so desperate for a place to belong that she'd climbed on a horse with a stranger and ridden into the unknown. That woman wouldn't recognize who I'd become. Wouldn't believe that the scared, heavy, unwanted bride would transform into someone strong enough to kill, to build, to survive everything the world threw at her. But I recognized her. She was still in me, that frightened woman, but transformed, forged by fire into something harder, sharper, more resilient. "We did it," I said aloud to the empty night, to Rowan's grave on the hill, to the universe that had tried so hard to break me. "We survived. We built something worth having. We won." The stars didn't answer, but they didn't need to. I knew the truth of it in my bones. I lived on that mountain for another 12 years, tending my garden, maintaining the cabin, occasionally hosting visits from Sarah and her family. Young Cordelia came sometimes on her own, asking questions about strength and survival and how to live life on your own terms. I told her the truth, that it was hard, that it cost something, that you had to be willing to stand alone when everyone else sat down, but also that it was worth it, that freedom was worth any price, that being yourself completely was better than being acceptable. She listened the way I'd once listened to Rowan, soaking up wisdom born from hard experience. I was 70 when the winter finally got me. "Just tired," I told Sarah when she came to check on me. "Just ready to rest." They buried me next to Rowan, on the hill above the cabin, with a marker that read, "Delia Hale, partner, survivor, free." The cabin still stands, people say. Empty now, but solid. A testament to what two people can build when they refuse to quit. Sometimes hikers stumble across it, wonder about the people who lived there, imagine the stories those walls could tell. And sometimes, on quiet nights, they say you can almost hear echoes. A woman's voice, firm and unafraid, saying no to the world's demands. A man's rough laughter. The sound of two people who'd found in each other what everyone said they didn't deserve. Partnership. Respect. Freedom. The right to live life on their own terms, no matter the cost. Because in the end, that's what this story was always about. Not romance or rescue or anyone saving anyone else, but two broken people finding each other and building something whole from their shared refusal to stay broken. Two survivors who looked at the world's cruelty and answered with their own strength. Two people who prove that worth isn't given, it's claimed, fought for, earned through blood and stubbornness and the absolute refusal to accept less than you deserve. I was the woman nobody wanted, the one they laughed at, mocked, dismissed as worthless. And I became the woman who survived everything, built a life from nothing, defended what was mine with my own two hands. That transformation, from worthless to invaluable, from victim to victor, that's the real story. And it's a story that belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it.